We're just talking in announcements. So
Okay.
yeah.
That's
in any event, we're taking a somewhat more conservative approach, and we're going to put out an RFP to find a manager who can manage to this narrow theoretical problem.
and our advisor is very comfortable that they have a couple really good options for us. So hopefully in our September meeting, we will be able to report that we have commenced moving some of that portion of the permanent fund that's currently sitting as cash, and it's significant, about 33%, as I recall, maybe a little more.
200 million.
200 million is sitting as cash, so it's ready to deploy into equity at the drop of a hat once we pick a firm.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Sure. Okay.
It came out of here, so no video, obviously. I don't, or maybe.
The only video is the presentations.
Okay.
So
We were really just
okay.
It's a static display.
I do that. Yeah, I do that on Tuesdays.
Okay. Any other announcements? Thank you, Commissioner Moffitt. All right. Next item. I'm sorry. Yeah. Go. But yeah. Open public comment period for non-agenda items. And I'm looking at the sign in here, and here, Miss Rave, did you want to make comment? Okay. And as you well know, please introduce yourself for the record. Well, welcome.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Beverly Rave with Land Rights Solutions, and this is Vicki Runyon, also with Land Rights Solutions. We're going to just give you the short information. We do understand that the board cannot make decisions today, but we wanted to give you an update on some information. After a meeting with Jared Smith at the Northwest District Office, he suggested that if we could come up with some additional maps or new information, that we should present that. And so that's what we're here to do.
Related to
the rights of ways and the small pieces of land that are on the north side of County Road 4 in Moffett County. This one specifically dealing with John Smith.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. What we will do basically is provide you with some justification for the existing legal access, or why we believe there's existing access, and then request that the board affirm that access and provide some direction to the staff. As we go through this, we'll have some copies of maps. I apologize that they're not the very best, but these are old. This map, for example, is a BLM map from 1879. This would have been prior to the time that the state had any ownership in that area. In 1907, the State Land Board acquired their ownership in the land in 1902, is when the clear list was completed. There were a number of homesteads that were at least applied for prior to 1902 that are adjacent to some of this property. If you look at the road that comes across, was called the Little Snake River Wagon Road. You can see from the red arrows where that road came across, and where the arrow to the right is, that was a road that went straight north to another county road, and that divided a homestead on the west side from a piece of state land that was on the east side of that road. So at that point in time, there was access to those lands along that little road that went right straight to the north. The next map is a quad map from the Craig quadrangle. Go to the next one. It blown up a little bit. Again, you can see where the road came across the straight line and then angled up to the north. And at that point, instead of going right straight north, it actually went through, from right there, it went through state land, or what became state land. So that map is from 1916. The state of Colorado issued a right-of-way for the county road to follow that kind of angled road that went up through there. It was right-of-way number 446 in Book 4. That road goes through the land. That little L-shaped or upside down L-shaped piece is the parcel of land in question. The county road runs along the south side of that, and there is a very small parcel, less than an acre, of state land that is on the north side of that county road. The state also issued a right-of-way, number 623 in Book 6, for a ditch and canal that followed that road. That right-of-way required the construction of the ditch within a certain period of time, and then the ongoing use and maintenance of the ditch and adjacent lands, the flumes, culverts, etc. In order for whoever it is that has that ditch right, in order for them to be able to maintain that ditch, they have to be able to get to it. At this point in time, yes, to that portion of the ditch is across that little piece of state land and into the private land that John Smith now owns. John is not the only one that uses that right-of-way or that uses that ditch. There are 3 or 4 other people that go through that gate across that little very tiny strip of state land, most of which is in the county road right-of-way, to access that ditch, maintain their ditch rights, to maintain their head gates, etc., including the ditch rider that goes along there to check those head gates. We also have a copy of a map from the state land board from your access file or atlas file that shows, you can see on there where County Road 4 goes across there, the access off of County Road 4 and the road that goes up and across the ditch. That is the only ditch crossing, and the road along the ditch is on the north side. And as you can see, there is no road along the ditch back to the west or to the south. So this is really the only way to get up to and across that ditch. And this does show then the rerouting of exactly where County Road 4 goes. There was a patent issued in 1955 by the state to C.B. Jebbins for that little upside down or L piece of property for 120 acres. The only access to that piece of property is this road. There is private land around that. If you look at the Craig GIS maps, you can see the ownership. You can see where the little L-shaped piece is that John Smith now owns. The land to the west of it is owned by David Moore. The land in the little inholding down to the acres is another ownership. To the east of it is another ownership, and to the north of it is another ownership. So the only access to this piece of property is across that road, which has been there for many, many years. David Moore, who owns the land to the west of this, also had a piece of state land that was on the north side, a little strip that was on the north side of County Road 4. David made the decision when that was advertised for disposal, he made the decision to purchase his. And as far as I know, he has submitted his application according to state land board procedures to acquire his piece. When his piece was re-advertised, the piece that John Smith has along the south side of his was not, which I'm not sure why it wasn't, but John was not given the opportunity to bid on his again. I will pass out a packet of information that has all of these exhibits, and it does include a copy of the legal notice for the land that was owned by David Moore and what his bid was and so on. We also have several photos that we can scan through just quickly that show this is the gate that goes off of County Road 4. This is the road that goes up to the ditch. You can see the ditch coming down through there and the road going across it. That's the culvert that's under the road that allows the access across it. Pictures of that culvert. And then this is the road that goes up the north side of that ditch. And you can see the head gate there where John gets his water out of that ditch. The ditch.
This road up here is the access from the gate at the top
Right.
to County Road 4.
The ditch is actually part of the west side canal system that's in that area. The water actually comes out of Wyoming. John owns 589 shares out of that ditch. So he does have significant ownership there. With that all said, and she can scan through some more of those pictures, but based on the maps provided by the state, we actually believe that David Moore had access, but since he has elected to go ahead and buy his, that really becomes a moot point. With respect to John Smith or L.R. Smith and his access from the county road, as the maps and photos show, there is an established road off of County Road 4 to the ditch for which the state issued a right-of-way prior to the transfer of the patent on the land, which was issued subject to existing right-of-ways. At the time the patent was issued, this was the only legal access to the 120 acres that did not require crossing private land. Multiple parties have historically used this road to access their water right in that ditch. John owns the water right for his access. As the current landowner of the land between the state land and the ditch, he is obligated, as we believe the state is, to allow other water rights owners and the ditch rider access across his private land to access that ditch to service their water right and to be able to put their water right to beneficial use. We believe that an additional case can be made that since the rights of ways issued by the state for the road, the ditch, and for a road, which was realigned by the county, there has been legal access to that 120 acres since long before the state patented the land to C.B. Jebbins in 1955. The access from County Road 4 has been used as the access to first the state land and then the patented private land and to the ditch since prior to the patent, so for more than 50 years. We request that the State Land Board not only affirm L.R. Smith's access from County Road 4 to his private property and as the access to the ditch, but affirm that that access for the other water rights owners and the ditch rider also exists. Based on these findings, there is no reason why L.R. Smith needs to purchase the state land. The parcels are so small that the state could never dispose of the land to anyone other than the adjacent landowners. Because even if you added together the part that John had and the part that David Moore had, they would not create an acreage requirement to meet the standards for a building site in Moffat County. Those isolated parcels, virtually all of which are located in a county road right-of-way, add no viable land value to either the State Land Board or to L.R. Smith. As I said, David has agreed to buy his. For the benefit of the trust, if the board determined it was appropriate, Mr. Smith would be willing to purchase the land adjacent to the 120 acres if the state determines that's in the best interest of the trust, and would consider to offer to purchase the land for $1,000, which is well above fair market value for land lying north of the center line of County Road 4 with no survey required. The parcel is less than 1 acre, so that offer would be more than consistent with the price paid by Howard Lee for some land just to the west, which was at $1,000 an acre, which was more open and included some irrigated land, which he also recently purchased from the board. So in closing, we request that the board affirm the right for L.R. Smith and other water rights holders on the West Side Canal system to have access across that piece of property. And if the board determines it's in the best interest of the trust to dispose of the land, to initiate the state land board's process and advertise it at a reasonable value, which, as I said, Mr. Smith would be willing to pay $1,000. He might even consider the $2,500. But that the board would direct the staff to initiate that process. We look forward to assisting Mr. Smith in responding to any public notice to acquire the land, which we believe is beneficial to the trust in the reduction of management issues and the cleanup of an isolated parcel of state land. With that, we thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions? I appreciate the presentation today, and I think as we deliberate issues and work through some of these things, we take into account all the information possible, and we'll ask our staff to look at this and review it and bring it back and bring us an update. And if the commission have to take action at some point, it'll be brought back as a final action item.
Absolutely. So. Here's a copy of basically what we presented. With pictures and so on. So I'll give.
Great.
I don't tip my chair over.
Right.
Then I can have a claim, right? No.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Our next item, item C, Department of Natural Resources report. I see Ms. Moyer here. Welcome.
Morning, Commissioners. Amy Moyer, Policy Advisor for the Department of Natural Resources. I'll be giving the DNR Executive Director update on behalf of Bob Randall. I will begin on a staffing update. Becky Mitchell was recently announced as the new Director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Becky was an internal hire, and she was previously the section chief for the water supply planning section, was also very integral in drafting and coordinating the Colorado Water Plan. So we are pleased to have her on board as the new director, which was effective, I believe, last week. On the state engineer, I believe that announcement will be made very soon, likely for the end of this week, so stay tuned for that.
It appears you know something more than you're disclosing.
Possibly.
Okay.
Now the questioning begins.
So watch the news
This looks like
on that. Anyway, moving on to climate, many of you may have seen Tuesday's announcement from Governor Hickenlooper. Governor Hickenlooper signed an executive order committing the state to climate action and also committing the state to joining the U.S. Climate Alliance. Among other directives in the executive order, it includes goals to reduce Colorado's greenhouse gas emissions and carbon dioxide emissions, while also reducing electricity sales through cost-effective energy efficiency measures. So again, that was a very recent announcement on Tuesday. So I believe the executive order is available online to look further at that. And then finally, my last update is on the oil and gas front. The Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission has received over 250,000 lines of flow line location data. Some of that data will be incomplete, contain errors, and require follow-up. So the staff at the OGCC is working through that detailed work, which will likely take months rather than weeks. But as that data is cleaned up and ready to be publicized, it will be released on the COGCC website. I know that staff was very encouraged by the urgency of operators to provide this data and provide the analysis on the tests that they were required on the notice to operators that was released back in May. And then in terms of ongoing regulatory changes, discussions are continuing with the governor's office, DNR, and OGCC in terms of any potential regulatory changes resulting from the Firestone incident. So that is all I have for you today, but happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions for Amy? Oh, you're getting off easy today.
Wonderful. Well,
All
thank you.
right. Thank you. Next item, information items, 1A staff report, tab 8. And we generally sort of open it up for commissioners. We walk through the report if there are specific questions or requests, or Director Ryan, if you'd like to call anything to our attention in particular.
The only thing would be that further to Amy's comments about flow lines, Commissioner Moffett, you had asked a question about getting some more information on that. And we've asked Matt Lepore, the head of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, to come speak to you both about Firestone, about flow lines, and frankly, to give sort of an oil and gas 101 as it relates to the land board and their regulatory role in with regard to that industry. He'll be coming to do that at our October meeting here in Denver. We didn't want him to chase us around the state in August and September, so he'll be here to present in October.
Any
just,
comments? You want to watch the Hydroax video again, don't you?
Yeah. Can we do that? Looking at the leasing report, it was 101933. Let's see if I can. In Larimer County, assignment from FC1 Prospect. There were a whole bunch of assignments from FC1 Prospect, one of which, a bunch of which went to 2066. I was just curious about what that ground lease was. Is that a?
Go ahead. I'll take a stab at it. It's
Go ahead, I think I know.
It's the ground lease under the Prospect buildings up in Fort Collins, and we had extended the lease a year ago, probably, when some new owners came in, and they now sold the whole park. So
Got it.
They sold the buildings. We assigned the ground lease, and it was Paul's corporation had bought it, and we did the extension with them, and then they've since sold the park. Am I getting that right?
I'm sorry.
looking
I
for
was
nodding.
I was looking for Julie.
He's thrown a lifeline for affirmation.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yes.
That's actually something we saw sometime in the last 12 to 15, 18 months. Okay.
That ground lease had less than 20 years left. And
extended it so they would.
New owner of the buildings wanted to make some investments to renovate the buildings. Do that without having certainty about the terms. So we brought you an extension of that ground lease for, I think, 40 years.
All coming back.
And
perfect. Thank you.
They, now that they've put all that in place, sold the park. Yeah.
Okay.
The park.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I would just note that on the revenue projections for this year that we project ahead of budget, which is fantastic. I think we do a great job. My experience here, we've had great years revenues wise. I think we are, given that we've projected the bonus cliff, the fact that we're where we are is, I don't take that for granted. So appreciate that's a function of continuing to diversify our revenue streams and certainly manage expenses. So appreciate that. Anything else on the staff report? All right. Next item, 1B, Investment and Development Fund Status, tab 9. Schnurbush.
Good morning, Commissioners. Pat Schnurbush, Finance Manager for State Land Board. Let me queue up my presentation. Just give me.
Sure.
As Commissioner Butterworth stated, I'm here to give you an update on the Investment and Development Fund that had been requested earlier. Now, keep in mind, the figures that we're giving you are not yet for fiscal year end. They are at a period of time when we took this snapshot. and they will be updated at a later point in time. Some background, well, here's the purpose of the discussion is to give you some background, the fund status, and then answer any questions that you may have. Just for some background, especially Commissioner Carney, since this is your first cycle through this, dollars are statutorily appropriated for the Investment and Development Fund. We may draw up to $5 million per year from school revenue from royalty. There is no spending deadline. These funds are appropriated and or non-appropriated, and they roll annually. And one thing that is important and is beneficial for us is they are exempt from state procurement rules. That doesn't mean we just go out and hire anyone. We do our own internal bid process and make sure we do get the best value for our funds. But we do not have to go through a formal process. However, we are not exempt from state fiscal rules, so we do follow those guidelines. This is a snapshot of where we were about the end of June. We had an opening balance of a little over $3 million. We've transferred in so far $2.5 million, and we have earned almost $30,000 of interest through May. That gave us a little about $5.6 million available this fiscal year. Personal services costs and encumbrances total a little over $500,000. That funds for FTE, and it's not for full FTE, it's partial FTE that totaled for equivalents. We also have operating costs of $300,000, which are our due diligence, our appraisals, our surveys and studies for our properties. And we have approved board orders that totaled $6.5 million, and this includes previous year's board orders that were not fully expended, and we carried the balance over. We need basically about $7.4 million to fully fund our investment and development projects that we have. What we haven't drawn yet this fiscal year is a little over $1.7 million, and we are looking at the fourth quarter draw being somewhat less than that amount. We will analyze the current projects, find those that are closed out, free those funds up, and transfer only what we need at the end of this fiscal year. The budget criteria for investment and development projects is they must have a return on investment. They must be value added to our assets. As I stated before, they cover salaries and benefits for 4 FTE. Again, our operating budget is property due diligence. It covers the board orders that you have authorized from investment and development funds. Those board orders typically cover large infrastructure projects, entitlement projects, and as of last fiscal year, or is it this fiscal year, I believe, up to $1 million in maintenance projects or our assets. And this is for school trust only.
I believe I'm correct, so I'll say it as a statement, and then you can tell me if I'm wrong. The maintenance projects, $1 million, do not need to show a return on investment.
Correct.
Assistant Director Okus made that
Assistant Director Okus.
inquiry. Yes, please.
That is correct. There is no statutorily required return on investment that has to be shown on just the maintenance project.
On the maintenance projects, thank you.
Very good question, thank you.
I'm going to, I know we've made, this is Commissioner Butterworth. We've made some multi-year commitments. How do we account for those? Like, is that, if it's a $1 million commitment, but it's $250 over 4 years, are we taking the full, like in foundation world where you take credit for the distribution for the out years in that year, as opposed to you sort of market 250, 250, 250?
If I could refer you to, I believe it was tab 9.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's the very last page. It shows the spreadsheet of the Investment and Development Fund data as of 6/22. I think it is the very last page of your tab. There's a kind of a complicated spreadsheet.
That would be page 133 of 233 in the packet.
Thank you. We do carry the out year costs as in the very right-hand column, remaining balance by board order. For this particular purpose and for this
Okay.
fiscal year, we have already authorized $3.6 million in investment and development funds. I had a meeting with Director Ryan, and we felt it prudent to draw funds this year just to cover our outstanding board orders, even if they are out-year projects. Otherwise, we start next year's $5 million with a $2 million encumbrance on it
Got
right
it.
away.
Got it.
So we want to be fiduciarily responsible and not draw too much, which is why we will not draw the full 5. We will only cover the open board orders, but I think we have demonstrated great success in some of our larger projects, for example, 1278 Sherman. And if another opportunity arises next fiscal year, I do not feel that we should be handicapped by not having the availability of the funds. So we are trying to be responsible with the funding, but also look to the future.
Help me,
Commissioner Moffitt.
Greg Moffitt here. Some of these look like the remaining balance by board order is no longer outstanding. For instance, I'm assuming we're done spending money on Gutierrez, and hopefully we're done spending money on the Hydro Acts, Greg. We already got the video, for goodness sakes.
Well, got the video. There's some more things that may hit this. We were obligated to buy some maintenance equipment, a power washer and things. So there's some little expenses that'll still come through.
But some of this looks like it's artifact at this point, and that'll get cleaned up at year end.
Correct. I'm waiting for the final costs to come in, so we have our exact ending balance, and then we will contact the project managers and find out if they are finished with their projects. At which point in time we'll zero that out.
And I think you explained this, but that right column is for the most part something we have obligated. We have ordered to be spent, and we just haven't spent it all yet.
Correct.
Okay.
And as you stated, for example, there are 2 on there for the Gutierrez Ranch. Since we have disposed of that asset, those are finished.
If I could get you to come up and do this on our budget in town, that would be great.
So I wanted to demonstrate that we do track this very closely. This is a very important fund for us. It allows us special ability that no other agency, I believe, has. So we do our due diligence and track it to ensure that we don't overspend any board order.
This is Commissioner Bynum. This is great and very thorough, and I think really addresses the questions you've heard over the when we said, gosh, we would like to know more about where we stand. And thank you very much for this.
You're very welcome. As an aside, each fall we issue the past fiscal year's investment and development report. We issue to the legislature. It's posted on our website. It also is part of your packet, last year's. And it does provide detail on everything that happened that fiscal year with the status of the current projects that are in place. So we will be issuing that again this fall.
This is Bill Ryan speaking. I'd love for the takeaway to be, because you'd asked some questions, and I know as our new commissioners rotate onto the board, every expenditure gets approved by the board before we do it. We try to transfer over only enough money to cover the expenditure, because the dollars that we don't use for I&D flow straight through to the beneficiaries. So we're pulling revenue out of the stream that supports the beneficiaries, and we try to be very careful about that. Pat monitors this very rigorously, and then we report out to the legislature every fall on it. So there are lots of checks and balances in the system, and that's great, because this is a really important tool for our success, and we would hate to lose this tool.
And just to color the commentary for our new commissioner's benefit, this fund does not have a long history. And prior to the institution of this fund, if a asset didn't generate enough revenue to perform the maintenance didn't get done. So fences, ditches, everything. So,
and other agencies would be required to go to the legislature and ask for the money to fix something, and you're having to plan for that 2 years in advance because the way the budget cycles work. This allows us to maintain and improve our assets on short notice, and without having to go through the appropriation process. And given the amount of things that we own, and things break, this gives us flexibility to be good landlords and be good property owners.
And some gallons in a water tank.
So I hope this was responsive to the request that you all had, that we provide some more detail about how this fund works.
But we'll probably still keep asking those questions.
And you should. You're the fiduciary.
Sometimes you need to hear it a couple times for it to sink in or to refresh your memory. So even though this was so thorough, please excuse us when we ask the same question again in a few months.
Kristen noted yesterday that we need to hear something 7 times for it to sink in. I think we're only up to 3.
I can handle 4 more times. One item to note is that it will probably be October of this year. We will report back to you on how we finished the fiscal year in our base budgets. We'll show you the budget for the coming fiscal year, and we will also provide the year-end data for the investment and development fund. So you will be seeing this again at least once more, and I am happy to include it every time when we do our 6-month expenditure update in the year. Then I can include this. If you would like it more often than that, let me know, or I'd be happy to drop the spreadsheet into a staff report. I would like, you can give us your feedback.
There are a couple larger items on here that we probably, and I'm not suggesting we do it now, but we probably ought to get an update on. The nearly $300,000 on Dowd planning, for instance. We should go through, pick a threshold.
I think we get some background, but maybe when we have I&D fund requests that you just preemptively provide the overview, because invariably there's a question about the balance or where are we in our cycle. So you just sort of nip that.
Yeah, I think that's
ahead
a
of time.
great way to approach it, is when we have an I&D request to provide the packet, the
I
information.
could drop staff
Yeah.
reports,
Mhm.
comfort level, and where we are in the fiscal year.
Okay.
And to answer your response, Commissioner Moffett, I think probably the fall report that we send to the legislature, that will have a snapshot of an update on each project that was active that fiscal year. So I will make sure Mike includes that. Make sure every project is in there this fiscal year. He always does, but we'll double check.
Great.
Thanks, Pat. Just one question. What's the year on our fiscal year, our dates, I guess?
July 1st to June 30th.
Happy
For
New
those
Year.
at home, that was Commissioner Carney. I'm familiar with his voice just thus far. Okay, any other questions on this subject? Before we head into final action items, I'm going to suggest we take a quick break because we've got a couple of items that may take a little while longer. So let's reconvene. Let's take about a 5-minute break. Today, July 13th, Thursday, meeting of the Colorado State Board of Land Commissioners. Moving into our final action items for today. First item is 2A, tab 10, oil and gas lease 106456 revision. Ms. Coranda?
Commissioners, Crystal Coranda, and I'm going to be discussing with you a potential revision to oil and gas lease 106456. This will be a final action item. I will give you a little bit of background, the recommendation formula, and how we came up with our recommendation, and then I will see if you have any questions. And before I begin, I wanted to let you know that Conoco has sent 3 people here, and so they are also available to answer any questions, and we can either questions at the end and bring them up, or if you have any questions while we're going, feel free to just stop and if I can't answer it, I'll see if one of them will be able to help assist. So we have Jessica Martinez here, who is a reservoir engineer, and Seth Lovelady, who is also a facility engineer. And Kathy Dinzer is the landman for Conoco, who works out of the Watkins office and is our main contact. Here is an overview of the state, and as you can see, the Lowry lease is right here, this big blue parcel of land. It's in Arapahoe County. And a little bit of background, ConocoPhillips leased the Lowry Range, and I'm going to refer to the lease as the Lowry lease, Lowry Ranch, interchangeably, but they leased this back in 2012 for $137 million. And I say that they leased a portion of the Lowry Range because there were some of the parcels in the middle of the range that were already leased for oil and gas and went into production. And so they are still held by production today and are leased by other operators. So they don't have the entire ranch, but they do have majority of it. And to date, they have paid about $7.7 million in royalties, and they have complied with all of their lease obligations. And they have been a really great partner. So one of the things I wanted to point out was this was the biggest lease that the State Land Board has ever done in the history of size and the magnitude of bonus that we received in. And so a lease was written specifically for the range that is different than any other oil and gas lease that we have. So Conoco has a lot of drilling obligations, which they've met. They require annual reviews with us, and we talk about development plans. There's also a lot of biological stipulations that they must meet, and they have a biologist on staff that does a lot of reports, and they report to us annually. So they have been a great partner with this lease in this area. Background. For this lease, one of the main concerns when we were issuing this lease is that everything below Quincy Avenue is in the stewardship trust. So there is this area, there's a large block of land with a good resource potential, but it was in the stewardship trust. So staff decided at the time to come up with a tier map to try and protect some of the surface, And so they came up with a map that was rated from 1 to 4, 1 being no surface occupancy. And a lot of those are here in green, where the proposed reservoir is going to be 1,500 feet on either side of Coal Creek and Box Creek. And there's a Department of Military Veterans Affairs lease. These are situations that we didn't want any surface occupancy on. Then it goes to tier 2, 3, and tier 4. It goes down to where we preferred surface occupancy, where there was already prior disturbance. And that could have been from prior solid mineral operations. There was a cement plant, there's gravel and mining operations, so there's prior disturbance. And it actually, since this used to be a bombing range, there was, in one instance, disturbance from prior bombing activity. So these are places that we preferred surface locations as disturbance already existed. And there is on this lease, there's a total disturbance cap. Conoco is only allowed to disturb 650 surface acres, or 3.14%. And as a deterrent, to put stuff on tier 2 lands, for every 1 acre of disturbance in tier 2, it's going to be counted against that cap as 2 acres. 2 other provisions that I wanted to point out that will be pertinent to this discussion is that the lease allows for reasonable revision over time to accommodate operational changes and unanticipated changes. I think because this is such a large lease that we had to put, our staff at the time probably put that in, just knowing that things may change over time. And there's also a provision that minimum intrusion on or over tier 1 lands can happen with written approval from the board. So the 3 things specifically that we'll be discussing, Conoco is requesting pad site location approval and adjustment to the boundary of tier 1 lands east of Coal Creek Road, and approval of intrusion on tier 1 lands for a pipeline crossing of Coal Creek. So the first issue, the pad site location revision. So on this map, you can see in yellow here the 2 original pad sites that they were looking at, and these were planned based off the tier map. So as you can see that these pads were based on available locations on the tier map, and there's very limited spots out here due to the proposed reservoir and the current reservoir. And so Conoco in talking with us and after being out there, they had discussed that it may be more beneficial to move the pads over and allow the pipeline to go against the road where there was already disturbance. But the problem was that there's a lot of tier 1 that they would be encroaching on. But if they felt that it may make more sense to be over there and by the road rather than to be out here and create new disturbance in areas where no disturbance occurs. And so staff agreed to look at their proposals, and that's what we're here doing today. So the northern pad, this is a close-up view of it. As you can see, majority of it would be on tier 4, and this would be the overlap of tier 1. And there is, I'm going to refer to this as Coal Creek Road, but realistically, it's just a service road. It doesn't have that name, but for the purpose of this report, Coal Creek Road. So here is the road, Coal Creek Road, and here's Coal Creek. There would be a 500-foot setback from the center line of Coal Creek to for the southern pad. As you can see, I have here, there's the red circles, which are, there's a certain setback that the COGCC requires from existing wells and plugged wells. So as you can see, there's a lot of different circles. They're really hard to see actually up there, but.
Thank you. I thought I'd gone colorblind.
But hopefully on your packet, you can see a little bit better. There are a lot of circles, so there is very limited space for this pad to be located. And as you can see here, this hash mark is the proposed reservoir, and there is a dam that will be located here. So and then the creek is on this side, so there's not much ability to move this pad anywhere else.
Can you go back to the northern location?
Yes, whoops. Oh, whoops.
Arrow back, yeah. Can you use the arrow?
The arrows on the keyboard.
There we go. So that little, where it's tier 1 portion, yeah, right. That little finger there, why would that have, is that because it was undisturbed?
Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
I take that one.
Yeah.
When we did the, I was here when we put this together. Crystal was not here, and so I'll take this one. This is Greg Okish, Assistant Director. There was a lot of discussion when we did the tier map internally among staff as to whether or not uniformly applying a 1,500-foot or setback from the center line of Coal Creek made sense, in particular in this location because there was so much disturbance on the east side of Coal Creek Road. So we actually at one point talked about ending the tier 1 along the road alignment. To be conservative at the end of the day, and we could have gone either way, we decided to go ahead and use the 1,500 feet, which resulted in these funny little shapes and remnants. And I think part of when Crystal gets to the recommendation, what staff is saying today, that is, given what we've learned, and in hindsight, we would not have drawn it that way if we were drawing it again today. And these little remnant green pieces wouldn't exist.
Right.
They're, the red was the result of the sand and gravel operation, I believe, maybe even.
Okay.
So staff agrees with Conoco's proposed pad locations due to a few different things. One, they're meeting all of COGCC setback requirements from existing wells, and they will be eliminating 4.2 miles of pipeline, and that will reduce 38 acres of impact on land that wouldn't otherwise be impacted. And staff went out and walked the sites and visited them with Conoco and staked them, and found that the northern pad made a lot of sense since Coal Creek Road is going to separate the pad from the creek. The pads will still maintain a 500-foot setback from the center line of Coal Creek, and after talking with CPW, I asked what their recommended setback would be to protect biological concerns, and they told me it would be a 300-foot setback, so they will be greater than the range CPW would request. And the well pads are at a lower elevation, and this was important because one of the pads, it was hard to see, that would be located in the middle of the reservoir. It was at a higher elevation, and so there was some discussion, what happens if there's a potential spill or runoff? Is that going to run down into the reservoir? And ultimately that was a risk that could happen. And so now the new location is going to be at a lower elevation on the other side of a dam, and that sort of risk won't happen at the new location. And then when we were out there, Greg realized too the site grading and earthwork required would be less at the new proposed locations. So are there any questions about the proposed pad locations before I move on to the next part?
Yes.
Commissioner Bynum.
On the the south one, do I understand correctly? You're not in the gray area, I mean, because of the circles, but you're still halfway in the circle. So why aren't you up a little bit further to get completely out of the circle? Is it because of the topography?
You
The circles are so.
Ma'am, need you to
Sorry,
just
I'm gonna
come up
here
and.
And I do know too that the productive portion of the wellbore will have to be outside of the red. So the pad still can house the wellbores, but the productive portion of the wellbore would be outside of that red radius. So, but I'll let you.
Jessica Martinez, reservoir engineer with ConocoPhillips. So basically hit it on the nail. There is a 500-foot buffer in between there. That is a drilling buffer to maintain an adequate distance for anti-collision concerns. So we wouldn't want to get that close to it, but we could have the surface location on the simulation setback, which is the 1,500-foot radius circle shown on this map.
And that answers your question. Okay.
Thank you.
So the second part of the discussion is requesting to change the Tier 1 classification east of Coal Creek Road, which would be this area I've highlighted in purple. So everything in green in this purple circle is what we would be requesting to change to Tier 2. And as Greg discussed, originally when the tier map was created, this was something that staff thought about, but ultimately they left it as Tier 1. And now we are seeing that the road is such a disturbance that realistically everything east of the road potentially should be Tier 2, because it does seem to make more sense when they have a total plan of the Lowry Range to keep disturbance along the road rather than to disturb areas that are currently undisturbed, and there's grasslands there, things of that nature. So our conservation services manager was also on board with changing these designated areas to Tier 2. So this adjustment would allow the pipelines to be built next to the road, and the road would act as a buffer between Coal Creek. Are there any questions before I move on to the third part?
You just mentioned that the conservation services manager is, yep. Kim said we only have to do it once, and then our voices will be recognized.
Oh, okay. You didn't convey that to me.
No, you're on the wrong end of the table. You mentioned the conservation services manager has reviewed this, and she's okay with its impact on prairie dogs. And
yes, I think she prefers the location. And the third portion is the request for a right-of-way under Coal Creek. And this would be a 50-foot right-of-way, and they would need 25 feet for temporary disturbance. And all this, what would happen is when they come to bring their equipment on, they would temporarily be on a Tier 1. So it would be a minimum intrusion on Tier 1. And they would be boring a pipeline under the creek and then coming out the other side. And I had asked, are there specifics on how close you would need to get to the creek before you bore the hole? And they would need to get surveys and have a survey company come in and do all of that. But before they go to the expense to do that, because it's very expensive to get surveys done, they wanted to make sure that the board was on board with their plan. So they wanted to get approval first, and then they're going to go get surveys. And ultimately, when they come back and request the right-of-way through the formal right-of-way process, the board will see their final plans and be able to know a little bit more about the situation. And I also wanted to point out that this is a very standard practice. Conoco is going under the exact same creek a few miles to the north. And so they said if wanted any photos, or if the board wanted someone to come in and talk about how they're doing that, it's going to be the same operation as they're doing to the north. Yeah.
I just want to clarify in case, I think you said when you described the right of way, you were describing the widths, right? 50 feet of width. An additional 25 feet width of.
Correct.
Okay, yes. It's much longer than that as it crosses. I would also offer, as I read the lease, and I think as we intended to write the lease, the approval for these temporary incursions into tier 1 is actually a staff level decision. But as Crystal explained, we didn't want to make Conoco go through all the work since the right-of-way request will come to you. We didn't want them to do all the engineering and survey work to find out that you might have concerns about it down the road. So we thought, since this was already in front of you, it was prudent to get sort of your agreement in principle, or to understand if you have concerns going forward that they can address during the engineering.
Something you just said, Greg, piqued my interest. So the eliminate or removal of something from tier 1 is a staff level decision?
No, I'm sorry. The temporary incursion into tier 1 for purposes of building a pipeline.
And we're not, are we actually, is the request to remove the pad sites from tier 1?
Yes, and that does require board approval.
Curious.
The first two items that Crystal presented require board approval.
I don't want to send us into the weeds if this is a discussion for a later date. Do we have a no net loss policy on any of the tiering out there, for instance? So would it be wise for us to, if we're going to remove something from tier 1, to find something else to put into tier 1 and maybe even increase tier 1 a bit?
We can discuss all the reasoning behind the map if you would like to at greater length, but my short answer would be no, I don't think there is a need. The tier 1 was intended to protect or identify, and in some cases protect. So in case of the reservoirs, it was simply to say, we don't want you to drill here because we think there's a future reservoir site and we don't want to go through the brain damage.
So we're not subject to a mandated preservation goal on this property?
No, and in fact, the 650 acre cap is subject to, or if you will, once they reclaim something, they can put land back under the cap. So we're entirely comfortable that if of the 22,000 acres that they lease, if they disturb at any time up to 650, we were very comfortable with that. And the expectation is they'll disturb less and be reclaiming as they go. So we don't expect we'll ever hit that.
Do the other lessees weigh in on these requests?
No.
So are we comfortable that this doesn't adversely impact, for instance, the ag lessee out there?
They're aware of it. I shouldn't say they don't weigh in. They don't have veto authority. Okay. We've made them aware of it. They know what's happening and they're comfortable with it.
Okay.
An annual meeting with all of the lessees out there, so the whole group gathers.
And there's more than 2 and less than 50 lessees.
20 some lessees in the range.
Okay.
I'm sorry, on the ranch.
That picture, I had a picture up on one of the other slides, and that was from the annual lessee meeting this year. So.
Big meeting. Okay.
And so at this time, staff recommends that the board approve the staff proposal to amend the tier map of the Lowry lease as discussed herein.
Crystal, probably several years ago now, we had a sand and gravel lessee asked to expand, and there was a discussion around it would encroach upon, I think, Piedmont grasslands. Is that in play here? And I mean, you mentioned that Mindy had sort of checked off on this proposal, but
I am not aware of a Piedmont grasslands issue. From my understanding with Mindy, she preferred the disturbance to the road because it was going to go through an undisturbed area, and I don't know if that area had the grasslands, and that's why she did prefer the road. But
you go back to the tier map. Commissioner, is your question, was Piedmont grasslands a consideration in this discussion, or was your question about the sand and gravel operation?
It was bringing back that and the fact that it was encroaching on. I don't know that that was the reason we did not approve an extension of that sand and gravel lease, but it was at the sort of core issue that the
it was one of the
expansion
considerations. You're right.
Right, and so I'm just wanting to know if that was part of this conversation, and if Mindy was part of this conversation, I'm assuming that that would be
it was part of
flagged on her radar, and that what we're doing here would be consistent with what we've done in the past related to
I
that.
believe it is, and I'll show you on this map. This is Greg Okish, Assistant Director. On this map, for the most part, this yellow area was Piedmont grassland.
Okay.
There were also, I think may have also been some prairie dog colonies in there, but for the most part, that was Piedmont grassland. And so,
Okay.
Mindy Gottsagen's point of view was that, again, we've already got this disturbance. And in fact, we identified the main roads on the property as areas where disturbance was additional operational disturbance was desired rather than plowing new ground, if you will. And by putting the pipeline here, we've avoided these yellow areas. So it was a consideration.
Thanks. Okay, so I believe you made a recommendation here. Is that where we are?
Yes.
Okay. Before we take a motion, questions, comments for Crystal or representatives from Conoco? Seeing none, I would entertain.
We're going to see if there's any public comment.
Yeah, thank you. Members of the public wish to comment? Entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve Conoco's request to amend the tier map in attachment 1 of the Exhibit B of the oil and gas lease 106456 to convert approximately 20 acres of Tier 1 no surface occupancy land into Tier 2 controlled surface occupancy lands to accommodate 2 proposed well pad locations as shown in the map attached to the board packet. Convert all lands in Section 12, 13, and N2 of Section 24, Township 5 South, Range 65 West, and east of Coal Creek existing road from Tier 1 to Tier 2, and approve a minimum intrusion on Tier 1 land in Section 24 to build an oil and gas pipeline adjacent to and under Coal Creek, and delegate authority to the director to take appropriate action consistent with this decision.
It's been moved by Commissioner Moffett.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Bynum. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes in favor. Motion passes 5-0. All right. We're going to stay with you, Ms. Coranda. Tab 11, item 2B, oil and gas royalty rate reduction.
Oh, Crystal Coranda, Minerals Director, and I'm going to be discussing with you the potential for an oil and gas royalty rate reduction. And I wanted to hand out an email that I received this morning so you can have a copy. This will be a final action item, and I will be providing background and the recommendation, and then see if the commissioners have any questions. The email that I'm passing out is email from KOGA, and it is basically stating that they are still on board with the same opinion that they had back in January of 2016. And so for a reference, I also attached the letter from 2016 because I know not everyone was here at that time. So I was originally trying to, I know at the previous meeting, Commissioner Moffett was a little upset about getting comments the day of and had made comment of that. So I did try to send this out over a month ago and requested comments by a certain date, but apparently there was some staff turnover at KOGA, and so unfortunately we received it this morning.
This was relatively short, Russell. We could knock this one out. It's getting the 4 pagers while we're sitting here. That's a little
Oh, did
tough.
you not get the?
No, I got that, but the other one is as
Okay.
read.
I think there should be a letter attached to it.
Yeah, from
Okay.
from 2016, January 2016.
So a little bit of background. In 2016 at the board meeting, the board approved to increase the royalty rate from 1.6 to 20%. And at that meeting, staff had proposed a concept of the core production area and just raising the rates in Weld County, the DJ Basin area, and leaving the rates at 1.6 throughout the rest of the state. And at that time, the board decided to reject that concept and said, no, we'd like to raise the rates statewide to 20%. And so at that meeting, KOGA discussed that they would like a way for operators to come in and obtain a lower rate. And so I went back and listened to the tape of that meeting just to kind of make sure I remembered what happened. And there was conversation back and forth, and the board ultimately agreed that there should be a way for operators to request their lower rate, and had asked staff to develop a concept for that. And since the January board meeting, roughly 3 operators have inquired about how they could get a reduced rate. So after that meeting, I went to work trying to figure out what method we should use. So first I evaluated a pre-auction conference, and this was the method that KOGA supported and wanted. They wanted to meet with us and discuss why they should get a lower rate, and then present their findings to the board. We thought that this would be very time-intensive meeting with a bunch of different operators, and it could be very subjective, and we might have someone coming in, why did you give them the reduced rate and they're a mile from my lease and you didn't give me one? And so it would result in a lot of inconsistent outcomes. The second idea that I thought about was a application. I wanted to make the application very intensive so we wouldn't get a lot of people, you would have to do a lot of work if you're going to apply for it. So I was going to have them prove financially why they couldn't do 20%, show geologic data, show production data that there wasn't production in a certain area. And I ultimately had an operator that was nominating over 100 tracts, and he told me if this application existed, he wanted to fill it out for each one. And then individually, we would come to the board to ask for the board to approve them all. So after I started talking to a few more operators, and I said, if I had some sort of application, would you use this, and would it be standard or just for some? And they pretty much sounded like if there was a way to get a reduced rate, everyone was going to try the application just to see if they could get it. So I started realizing it would be very labor intensive. I didn't know if we had enough staff resources to review the 40 to 100 nominations a quarter come in and review all the paperwork, and then it would consume board meetings because we would be coming to the board to decide all of these reductions. I know I've used PowerPoint before, I'm sorry. So at this time, what I am requesting is an automatic reduction. If things are unsold at auction, they will be initially offered at the 20% rate. And then if they are unsold, they would be auctioned at the next auction for 18.75. The benefits of this process, it would be very resource efficient for staff and the board. It would be transparent and predictable, and the royalty rates would be determined by the market. And we think it would provide a little bit of incentive. If something doesn't sell, then that would be proof that there was no market there. And then it would be incentive for someone to come in and pick it up at a little bit of a reduced rate. So we think that it might help boost sales in areas where there is otherwise no market. And when I went back and listened to the prior board meeting, I did hear some concerns about this potential topic. It had come up and was discussed a little bit, and there was discussion from some of the commissioners about playing a game of chicken, waiting to see and trying to get prices reduced, and maybe collaborating with other operators. And I think one of the main things that why this wouldn't happen is because at this time we use EnergyNet. When we had live auctions, I think there was more of a chance to look over at a guy that you saw bidding, wink, wink, nod, nod, let's wait. But now with EnergyNet, there's hundreds of bidders all over the world. Even if 2 people were trying to collaborate, they would have no idea what other bidders are out there and who could potentially come in and bid on it. So I think that that would be very hard to do. And I think having a reduction down to 18.75, it's a small enough reduction that there's not a huge incentive to try and take that risk and collaborate. And I think that it's an incentive, but it's not a motive.
Is that incentive enough?
I think
actually change, somebody dropping just 1.25%.
Well, so that's my next slide is kind of why did I pick 18.75? So a few reasons. One, when listening to the other board meeting, it was clear that the board wanted to raise the rate from 1.6. statewide. And so I thought that 18.75 was a good middle ground. And when you are in oil and gas, it's very common to see rates go from 1/12, or they go from 1/8, 12.5%, then they go to 1/6, then they go to 3/16, which is 18.75, then they go to 20%. So this seemed like it's a common rate that's used. It's a middle ground. And then second, whenever I look back at data from the last few years of nominations, things have remained steady. I was worried when we went to 20, are we going to price ourselves out of the market? Are things going to slow way down? And it seems over the last few years, nominations have remained completely steady, and so things did not seem to slow down after we increased the rate. And I only received a few nominators that required about how to get reduced rates. Typically, it's very small nominators, small operators in exploratory areas, but ultimately those nominators went ahead and nominated and then bid at the 20%. Even though they did have concerns, they still bid. So it seemed like if the board was looking to raise rates, this was a good middle ground. But I do agree that if you really wanted to promote that, that is an idea that it could be dropped even lower.
Thanks.
At this time, staff is requesting that the board approve the recommendation to auction oil and gas leases with a minimum rate of 20% and reduce the rate to 18.75 at the following auction if they fail to sell, and remove any tracts that fail to sell at the reduced rate from future auction lists until renominated, at which time they'd be listed back at 20%. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Bynum?
There's no cost to us if it's nominated and we list it and there's no bids. It doesn't cost us more money to list it, to put it out to bid again.
No, correct. And it actually is, I think, easier to then do it right at the next auction because CPW's comments are still fresh, and it just makes more sense to just put it at the next auction.
So the royalty only gets paid if the well produces, right? If there's production.
That's correct.
And I guess following up on Commissioner Butterworth's comments, does a 1.25% drop really create any incentive for people to rebid? I'm not sure we're accomplishing much, if anything, with this.
It may not create. I mean, it's not like I said, it's not a motive to wait and hold off, but it's a little bit of an incentive. I've had operators tell me that, they have a certain budget for how much land they can buy. And so they'll nominate, 5 tracts. And then if one of the tracts goes for way higher than they thought, they run out of money and can't bid on that last tract. So then offering it at a little bit of a reduced rate maybe gives them incentive to say, okay, well, I'll come in and get it. Again, it's not big, but
It's the long-term number. Crystal, tell me if I'm wrong, and I don't know how to punch it quickly in my calculator, but it's on a $10 million well, on a $10 million bonus that would have otherwise been ours, it's $1 million, I think, or there's a number. And I think it's just a matter of them crunching their operating costs and working a thin margin. So we could probably Crystal could probably do some math and figure out what it is in real dollars. If that would be helpful.
That leads to kind of the policy question, which is because now we're changing policy. Does the reduced rate result in a net? Are we comfortable that doing this results in a net increase in revenue for the trust? And let me ask a question before we walk into the answer to that. It also implies a rental payment. Am I right? So if we get somebody to bid, if by offering this reduction on marginal, less obvious producing areas, we might see an increase in rental payments, regardless of whether the royalty gets paid.
That's the idea, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is the idea. Yeah.
That's the idea.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you haven't because you're throwing darts, but can we make a case that doing this results in a net increase in revenue for the trust?
I Well, I think we can. Simple back and napkin, we can, because as Commissioner Bynum pointed out, there's no additional cost to us. And so if we lease more land that would have otherwise gone unleased, we've created a net benefit, albeit small, for the trust. We, as always, are counting on the drilling and the exploration to be done, and the royalty is the bigger part of our payment over time.
And these leases are 5 years?
Primary term.
Realistically, I'm not sure how many will go through, because a lot of the operators that call me, they hate this concept, because if they're nominating something, I mean, they're trying to make a play in an area, they want it. And so they don't want to take the risk. And especially with an online auction, most people, it's like eBay, bid in the last few seconds. So if they don't bid on something, they lose it. And they don't want to take that risk. So most people that really truly want to develop an area are going to bid at the 20%. So I don't think it will be that common to see things go through, but the ones that do, there truly isn't a market, and it's more exploratory. So they would be paying rent, and then hopefully if production occurs, great, then we'll have a market, and there'll be more competition in the area for other leases.
Do we put a time frame on this? Like let's
Try it.
do 1
Yeah,
year as opposed to, this is what it will be. Like we'll pilot this for 1 year and revisit it before we.
I was going to suggest that we yeah, exactly. Don't put a time frame on the policy change, but review the data in a year to see what's happened, and
Absolutely.
that will give us a basis for maybe making a policy change.
Like a number of how many actually went through, how many were sold. Yeah, we could do that.
Sorry, Commissioner Moffett, the very last thing you said confused me.
That wouldn't be.
In the beginning, did you say?
I'm sure it's me, not you, by the way.
Change the policy now, but don't put a time limit on it? Or did you mean to say, don't change the policy, put this into practice for a year?
Change the policy now, but don't sunset it.
Okay.
Let's be diligent about reviewing whether it's actually having a net effect.
I would agree.
Looking
Okay.
for public comment.
So am I. Are there members of the public who wish to comment on this?
I believe, yes.
Sure.
Andrew Casper from Koga. He wrote the email and would like to make a comment.
Yes, I am the author of the last minute email. My name is Andrew Casper. As Ms. Crana mentioned, I'm the Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs for the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. I'm here today just to say that Koga does stand by the position we articulated in the letter previously submitted in January. I do commend Ms. Caranda in reaching out to Koga ahead of time for our feedback on this, and apologize for the late notice, but I felt it was important to note for the record our position, as well as offer an alternative proposal for consideration that very much is similar to what is proposed in front of you today, but also includes another couple of tiers that could be nominated as, or that could be put forth as at a different percentage. And only then, if it would fail to lease for those 3 times or two extra times, then you would have the opportunity to then go into that type of a conference with the state land board staff. And that process is outlined in the 2016 letter on in 1E that in terms of the conference that we would be looking for. So an alternative to incentivize some activity as well as to get these parcels leased from the state land board's perspective in an effort to fulfill the mandate of the trust as well as the statute. So an alternative proposal for consideration is very, very similar to what was originally proposed, but has a couple followed by the opportunity for a conference should one elect to do so. So I just wanted to make those brief comments, but I'll avail myself for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Casper? Okay, thank you. Appreciate you being here. Any other members of the public wish to comment on this item? Any further questions or discussions from the commissioners?
Chairman, I move that we try to figure out how to state this as a motion. I'm just going to read the whole thing. After consideration of materials presented and testimony given, I move that we determine that it is in the best interest of the trust to auction state oil and gas leases with a minimum royalty rate of 20%, to reduce the royalty rate to 18.75% at the following auction for any tracts that fail to sell during the original auction, and remove any auctions that fail to sell at the reduced royalty rate from future auction lists until renominated, at which time they will be relisted for sale at the standard royalty rate of 20%, and delegate authority to the director to take appropriate actions consistent with this decision.
Would you care to amend that we explicitly request a report
in 12 months?
12 months, yes.
I would include that in my motion.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Moffitt. Second by Commissioner Shaw. Further comments? I guess I appreciate your request, and we didn't really discuss that, but I think for me, I think it's the job of our staff to always be open and considering. Our motivation is to do what's in the best interest of the beneficiaries, and I think this process here is a step to continue to get the land or minerals, under development. And so I think we're always looking at our processes, and I think we'll take this into consideration as we move forward.
That is a practical matter. Those of us that were here in January of 2016 pondered this extensively, as it were.
Yes. So any further comment on this? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Next item, final action item 2C. Oil and gas lease auction standard list tab 12. Ms. Stitt.
Good morning, commissioners. Give me just one moment. All right. Katie Stitt, oil and gas specialist, and I'll be presenting this morning the oil and gas lease auction. This is the standard list for the August 2017 auction. This is a final action item. We will be requesting that the board approve the standard list that contains 27 tracts. It covers a little under 13,700 acres in 8 different counties. 3 additional tracts have been moved to the supplemental tract list, and I'll go into a little bit of detail when I talk about the supplemental list as to why we have that list, since Commissioner Carney is new with us here. The auction in August is starting Thursday, August 10th. It ends the following Thursday, so it runs 1 week, and it is held online through EnergyNet. This is a map showing where our 27 tracts are on our standard list. They're kind of clustered northeastern Colorado. I kind of have 70 and I-25 tracts because they all seem to be right around there, but we do have a few in Washington County and a couple down in Cheyenne and Kiowa counties as well. Some background on how this process works for oil and gas leasing. Operators will nominate a tract. This usually is about 3 months before the auction occurs. We do an internal review before we send it out to partner agencies. That internal review basically looks at these nominated lands to see if there's a lease on it already, or if there's any other kind of concerns we need to talk about before we partner agencies to get comments. Once we've decided that, okay, we can send these tracts out,
We'll send them to agencies such as Parks and Wildlife to get their comments. We reach out to the Colorado Natural Heritage Program, local government designees. Those are folks that have registered with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to receive comments on oil and gas activity. We also reach out to the state archaeologists to make sure there aren't any special archaeological features on these properties. And then we also send it out to members of our own staff on these tracts. Once we've done the review, we come to you to get your approval for leasing these tracts. All of our tracts will receive stipulations in the lease regarding what our review has discovered. These either are general, and we have 4 general stipulations. The first 2 cover when we own the surface, and they will discuss whether or not there are biological concerns on the property or not. And then stipulations 3 and 4 are when we do not own the surface, and we'll discuss whether or not there are biological concerns or not on those tracts. If there are specific special circumstances that come up on some of our tracts, we do have the ability to add specific stipulations for that. Is there any questions?
Is a stipulation?
Stipulation is an item in the lease itself that requires the operator to take certain actions. For example, we'll be talking about some of them today, but it might be, say, a pre-construction survey on the property to see if something exists there. For this particular tract list, CPW did identify some special biological concerns. These 3 concerns here, the burrowing owl nest sites, swift box habitat, and the raptor nest and roost sites, their biggest concern was making sure that those sites were identified. And so for each of these concerns, they requested that operators conduct pre-construction surveys for those particular species. 2 other biological concerns that I'm kind of pointing out separately because they're a little unique. So we nominated, staff did, 1 tract on the list. CPW looked at the list and noted that there was an active bald eagle's nest site near that tract. And so they had recommended a NSO, which is a no surface occupancy, within a 1/4 mile of that bald eagle nest site, as well as additional timing restrictions. A no surface occupancy agreement, for those who are unaware, basically states that an operator cannot use the surface for accessing the minerals below. Those minerals have to be accessed off-site through an adjacent section. Does that make sense? Okay. However, this tract, the reason it is on the standard list as opposed to the supplemental list is because there is already a no surface occupancy agreement in effect on this property. So if this tract gets leased, it's already subject to that no surface occupancy. This is the same tract that the board reviewed back in April. We have converted a long-term non-mineral development lease to an NSO agreement, and that's this tract. The second kind of unique biological concern that CPW identified was the lesser prairie chicken. And we had 2 tracts that fell in their estimated occupied range, or the expansion range that CPW's found the bird existing in. And they recommended that we enroll these parcels into a special management plan. However, we don't own the surface. So if we don't own the surface, we can't, in our lease, require an operator to do specific things on the surface. So we put these on the standard list since we don't have control over the surface. So staff recommendation, we are recommending that we lease these tracts with either general stipulation number 1, which is when we own the surface and there are biological concerns, or general stipulation number 3, which is when we don't own the surface, but there are biological concerns noted. For the burrowing owl nest sites, the swift fox and the raptor nest and roost sites, we are requesting that operators consult with the staff and conduct a pre-construction survey to identify those species. For the tract that has the bald eagle's active nest site, since it's already subject to the NSO has a stipulation within there, so that will address CPW's concern. And with the lesser prairie chicken, we are asking that the that the lessee would consult with the staff to discuss best management practices for the lesser prairie chicken and to discuss that range-wide plan that CPW had recommended we enroll in. So with that information, staff is requesting that the board approve the oil and gas lease auction standard list containing 27 tracts covering approximately 13,700 acres with the recommended stipulations.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Commissioner or Director Ryan?
This is Bill Ryan. Commissioner Carney, I just want to give you a little bit of background on all of the work with stipulations. It reflects the dual mission that we have, that we're supposed to raise revenue for the school children, but we've got to balance that with good long-term stewardship. And so this whole sort of self-imposed process that we go through of reaching out to all these agencies is part of that natural tension in the mission. How do we take care of the assets and still monetize them at the same time? And so that's why this may appear a little bit cumbersome, but it comports with balancing the mission, the two halves of our mission.
Thank you for that.
Interestingly, Bill, Greg Moffitt here. This is kind of where I was headed with my in our conversation with Kristen yesterday. We are unlike most landowners in that we do try to balance environmental concerns with the fiduciary obligation to serve generate revenue for the kids. So the rigor with which we go through this process, and I'm looking at Krista now, is what I was kind of referring to, at least part of what I was referring to when we were talking about sustainability and a message that we, I think, should be able to pound our chests about a little bit.
Thank you.
Great. Public comment, seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the leasing the oil and gas auction standard list for the August 2017 auction as attached to the staff memorandum, and with the recommended special stipulations containing 27 tracts covering 13,693.73 acres and delegated authority to the director to take appropriate action consistent with this decision.
Moved by Commissioner Moffitt.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Bynum. Further discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Our next item, final action 2D, oil and gas lease auction, our supplemental list, tab 13.
All right, commissioners. Katie Stitt, oil and gas specialist again, and I'll be presenting the supplemental list for the oil and gas lease auction in August 2017. This is a final action item. The supplemental list is containing 3 tracts covering 1762 acres in Larimer and Elbert counties. The staff is recommending that the board approve these 3 tracts for leasing with the stipulations we'll discuss in the presentation. Some background as to why the supplemental list exists. We have an oil and gas development policy that the board approved in December 13 and last revised it back in February of 2016. As part of that policy, if any party gives a no lease or a no surface occupancy recommendation on any tract, those come to the board to be considered individually. Additionally, if the board decides not to lease those tracts, that tract won't be renominated for another year. So with that, the board can decline the nomination on specific tracts, and that would push out any renomination for at least a year. The board can approve leasing the tract with a specific stipulation as discussed, or the board can approve leasing the tracts with our general stipulations. Any questions? This is a map showing where our supplemental tracts are. We have the one in Larimer County, and then we have 2 neighboring each other roughly here in Elbert County. And I'm going to start with the tracts in Elbert County because they're sort of related. This is section 14. We own the surface on this entire section, and it's not highlighted here because this parcel is also enrolled in the public access program lease. And hopefully Abe is in here if I screw this up. But the public access program lease, if you're not familiar with it, is a lease that we have with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. It allows CPW to open our property up for the public to access for seasonal hunting, and there are timing restrictions involved with that. So this entire parcel is enrolled in that lease. Joining a state wildlife area, this is the Jumping Cow State Wildlife Area, but this parcel is not part of that state wildlife area. And the other item I wanted to point out on this map, because CPW made a note of it in their recommendations, is this lovely black and white line through here. This is County Road 125. And I'll point out why that road is kind of significant here in just a moment. So CPW recommended that we not lease this or lease it with an NSO. But they did put in an alternative if we did not want to go that route on this tract, that they were requesting that we restrict activity on the parcel outside of the collective hunting seasons. So for this parcel, they identified December 16th through March 31st, and then also June 1st through July 31st. So we have 2 relatively chunky periods of time there. They wanted the lessee to consult with CPW at least 30 days prior to any activity going on the property to make sure that that activity didn't interfere with hunting traffic or other vehicular traffic on that parcel. They had a preferred development area within 200 yards east of County Road 125. So if we go back to that map, they wanted it all 200 yards on this side of the road. And as part of that, they wanted it preferably not on the side of the road that was neighboring the state wildlife area. They also noted that this tract was within the Swift Fox high quality habitat area. So kind of reflecting back to our standard list, that's the same kind of special stipulation that we would include if it had been on the standard list, that they wanted a pre-construction survey. And if they found the Swift Fox, there are certain timing restrictions with that that are usually addressed by our standard stipulation. Staff is recommending that we go ahead and lease this tract with the general stipulation number 1 with some additional special circumstances. So the special stipulation with a requirement that that lessee would consult with the district manager or their designee, and that's standard. We do that all the time, but we were going to include a specific requirement that they discuss it with our conservation services manager regarding surface locations to make sure that we are addressing any kind of special wildlife concerns that are on that parcel. State wildlife areas are typically lands that have been identified that have specific wildlife components that make them attractive for hunting and other wildlife recreational activities. So this was something that we thought we could do that would benefit CPW's request and also allow us to lease. And then we would also include our Swift Fox special stipulation. So before I go on to the next tract, is there any questions about this specific one? Okay.
I guess I might just some background on this because this process is going much smoother than my early years on the commission. A lot of these tracks, what I've learned is many, it's a 5-year initial term. Many of them don't even get developed. I think at one point in time, we'd take a no surface occupancy recommendation from CPW and we'd say, okay, well, we can't just get there. We're trying to find a balance of generating revenue and taking advantage of those opportunities, but doing so, as Bill had mentioned, balancing the dual mission of this. And so, knowing that many of these actually will go 5 years and we don't even get to the permitting process, but by engaging in this, getting them under a lease, we're at least able to collect some revenue during that period of time. And I think all of these stipulations are important and are required should somebody come to that point of wanting to get the drilling permit. So,
yep. Right. Okay, so I will move on to the second tract that we're going to discuss. This one is also in Elbert County. This is like a zoomed out map of what we kind of just looked at, because here is section 14 that we just discussed. This is section 16. This one is a little more complex. We own the surface only on the north half of this section, but we do own the minerals underlying the entire section 16. The southern half of this section is owned by a private party who also happens to be our agriculture lessee on the north half. In addition, the southern part of this tract is under a conservation easement that's held by the Nature Conservancy. I want to point out specifically, however, our property to the north, the surface, is not under that conservation easement, and it is not enrolled in the state wildlife area. The southern half of this tract is in the state wildlife area. So, CPW also requested no lease or a no surface occupancy on this tract, and without really giving any indication that they wanted us to do this, they did note that it was also still within that swift fox high quality habitat area, with the same recommendations they put on the previous tract. Staff did look at this. We brought in Abe Medina, who's our recreation leasing manager, to discuss this as well, to make sure that we had all the information we needed to make a decision on this. And we did decide that we were going to go ahead and recommend that we lease this tract with the following stipulations. Since they had mentioned the Swift Fox, we were going to put our Swift Fox special stipulation on the whole tract. And then we were going to put two special stipulations, one that addresses that we own the surface on the north half. So we are requiring that the lessee consult with our district manager or the designee and the conservation services manager regarding surface locations prior to operation. But since we don't own the surface on the southern half, we can't require an operator do anything on the southern half. But we were going to request that they meet with us to discuss the same topics about the southern half. And also we were going to include a notification that that southern half is subject to a conservation easement, so they're aware of it. So any questions on this tract?
Questions? All right.
So my maps are getting more and more complicated as I go along, but this is the final tract on the supplemental list. This is the tract in Larimer County. So this is right outside the Loveland city limits. This is section 36. The red outline here is the part of the tract that was nominated. This is where we own the minerals. We don't own any of the surface above this portion of the tract here. We do own some surface in section 36. It's this building over here, which is why you will see that we own surface here, but it is not subject to the leasing process. This tract was identified because CPW had noted that there was a bald eagle's nest that impacted this property. When we mapped this, this is where the nest is. It's not located on the tract. And they have some buffers that they prefer no surface occupancy within a certain range of that nest. That's that purple circle. At least I hope it's purple. Yeah. It comes right up to the tract. So it isn't even impacting this tract, but because it was close, we put it on this list so you could see it. The green circle is the half-mile buffer that has timing restrictions regarding nest activity. That would be addressed normally through our general stipulation and would have been on the standard list. So, as I said, CPW had noted this had an active bald eagle's nest site. That request always includes a no surface occupancy within a quarter mile of that active nest, and then no human encroachment or disturbance from November to July. So staff is recommending that we go ahead and lease this tract with the following stipulations. Our general stipulation number 3. So 3 and 4, the general stips are when we do not own the surface. So it requires that the lessee consult with us about their surface plans prior to operation, so we can discuss any concerns that we have with them. And then we would also put in the special bald eagle's nest or root site stipulation that notifies the lessee that there is a active nest impacting the property. Any questions? Okay.
Questions, public comment? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the leasing the oil and gas auction supplemental list for the August 2017 auction as attached to the staff memorandum with recommended special stipulations containing 3 tracts covering 1,762 acres and authorizing the director to take appropriate actions consistent with the board's decision.
It's been moved by Commissioner Moffett, second by Commissioner Shaw. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Nice presentation.
Yeah, great job,
Good
Katie.
job, Katie.
Appreciate Let's take a quick break before we hit our policies and head to the finish line for today. So about 5 minutes. Us back to order here. Again, Thursday, July 13th, meeting of the Colorado State Board of Land Commissioners. Moving on, final action items. Our first, we're going to be hitting several policy reviews here. So our first one, item 2E, with cropland leasing. And are you going to do an intro?
Yes.
Ms. Hawthorne?
Yes, thank you. So for the record, Alicia Hawthorne with the Transactions and Record Services team. So as the commissioners, many are aware, over the last, I'd say 5 years, there's been a lot of hard work with the commissioners and staff working together to put together policies to help set up criteria and guidelines to help in decision making so that we're consistent and we're transparent as decisions are made. And believe it or not, we are ready. Many of the policies have provisions that state that every 3 years the policies will be reviewed and refreshed and discussed with the board, and we're ready to do that 3-year cycle for a handful of.
Ours are still fresh.
Hey,
though.
hey,
Oh.
we're always moving, aren't we? So we have the cropland policy today, and we also have the recreation policy, and then also the renewable energy policy. So those 3 policies are, so the program managers have identified a few tweaks that can and they'll be recommending to be made to you so that we are even more efficient and consistent in our decision making. And then Assistant Director Okish will then be presenting a 4th policy, and that particular policy, the lease actions policy, is not necessarily up for the 3-year cycle of review. There's just been a need identified that now is the time that it's appropriate for the board to discuss it and review that recommendation from Mr. Okish. So.
And Commissioner Butterworth, the other, even though the agenda lists these separately, as we ran through the presentation yesterday, it seemed to make more sense to have Larry, Curly, and Mo up here all at the same time.
Yes.
And so they're going to present jointly.
And I guess I'm not a part of the 3 amigos?
No, you're not.
So, William Olston will take it from here.
Thank you.
Morning, William Olston, field staff team leader. I'm sitting in for Mike Pollard today. Mike manages the croplands for us. It was Mike and I, we talked about it. It was determined that for a 15-minute proposal, he didn't need to drive that far. So he is monitoring this on the YouTube
Hi, Mike.
site that Kim very brilliantly set up. So we know you're there, Mike. So carrying on, and this is the evaluation time for the cropland policy, and we do have one change that we would like to recommend to you. The current, and it has to do with pricing, which is under lease terms 3C. Current practices use our formula with average county yields or individual production information, which we ask producers to give us at this point. We do not normally get that information, so it falls back to the average county yields. And to give you, just let you know what our current formula is based, for instance, the dryland crop formula is based on it uses wheat as a base for yield per bushel and price. The yield per bushel is a 10-year average. and the price per bushel is on a 5-year average, and then those factors are weighted. Again, we get that total, and we get a percentage of that total, and that basically is an attempt to translate the crop share, which is a normal transaction in the country on a situation like this, into a cash basis that we can easily monetize. So our staff's recommendation is to change the policy from asking for individual production records to a more that a lessee gives us their production information. Almost all lessees provide this information to the Farm Service agency as part of their insurance policies. It's required in order to have an insurance policy, and most people do have. So we feel that information is out there for the most part, and by changing the wording to require that the lessee provide either an annual crop insurance report or submit a written certification stating that they do not carry crop insurance, it'll increase our crop rate accuracy and the accuracy of our information, and probably increase the value of what we receive on our in our cropland leases, because most of the lessees we feel are well above average in their production.
Why would someone not have crop insurance?
That's a good question. It does happen. There aren't many instances, but some people, just don't feel that they want to carry crop insurance. They're willing to take that risk. I can't tell you what the percentage is, but it would be low. It was low when I was in agriculture. It's probably much lower than that now. I would guess. I'm sure most people do carry insurance. So
they're carrying the full risk. There's no risk on us.
Oh no. It's just a matter by using by knowing that information is there, and by requiring them to provide that information to us, we can get their actual production data. Whereas they're not willing. A lot of people are not willing to give that because they know that will.
But yeah,
we're not higher yield, a higher average production on their land, which will increase their cost of their lease.
So would that be the objection from a lessee to this? I mean, do you anticipate any objections resulting from this change? And I think you may have just highlighted one where the guy knows he does better than the county average, so he just as soon you use the county average because it keeps his rent down.
I mean, our decision is that, or our feeling is that by requiring this is public information, I think you'd say, or it's information that's out there. The FSA holds this information for the insurance policies. We feel that by requiring that as part of our policy, that information would probably be given to us.
Is the insurance information public by policyholder, or is it just aggregated? So, in other words, are we asking somebody, a lessee, to now because everything we do is public, are we letting them to let the world know what their production is, when even if they were submitting a report to the insurance company, it wouldn't be available for Bill's farm, for instance?
I cannot tell you that for certain. I should have checked that, and I did not.
Yeah,
let me give you an analog. We collect sales tax from every business in town. You can look at a sales tax report and see how the aggregated sales tax is performing, but you can't go look at Luca Bruno's sales tax report to figure out what Luca's doing, and that Luca's okay with that. He wouldn't want to tell you.
Right.
So that's my only concern is is it available disaggregated otherwise?
Any value if it's aggregated. We need to know what.
I understand.
Right.
I understand, but I'm trying to think from the lessee's standpoint.
From the lessee's point, they might really object to this under some things that maybe we didn't consider.
We can look into that.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, so much so that if they really were doing so much better than the average that we're using now, would we be in any reasonable way incentivizing them to perhaps not carry crop insurance? I mean,
No, there's no link between, I mean.
but if
carry
they don't have
insurance,
crop insurance,
They're
they
gonna have
just
to
need
provide
to,
the report.
they don't have to give it to
but
us.
if it hails or droughts, they've got a $250,000 problem.
Right. I'm just wondering,
I don't think the.
I just think we should be looking at every possible way this is hurting our lessees such that they might object.
And is our gain worth it, right? I mean, how much of a delta in revenue will we pick up by going off actual versus county average?
Well, there's I'm sorry, Assistant Director Okish, there's an analogy. We rate properties for AUMs, and that's what you pay us for. We don't then say, but we're not going to check or count the animals because we don't want to upset you if you're running more cattle than you've leased. They're in a lease agreement with us that says they will pay us based on one of two figures. And right now, we believe, and I'm sorry, Mike's not here, but we believe there's numerous instances where, because of the way the policy is written, they're simply saying, nah, use the county average. I don't choose to share this with you, and we understand why. I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Just a little of my side of things on the crop insurance and also on cattle side of things. With FSA, that's a government agency. So when you report to them, the payments that are made, they're public.
Oh, they are.
They are public because it's a government agency that's making those payments. Now, if you have private crop insurance, it'd be different, but through FSA, what he's stating.
I was hoping you'd chime in, but what I'm not sure of and what I should have checked is, does that also mean that the production records that an individual puts in, I do not know if that's public at that point or not.
I want to make sure I understood your comment. We could go call the government agency and figure out how many ears of corn Tyler Carney grew last year because you paid insurance based on that?
If they were to receive a payment, you would see the payment amount, but I'm not sure either if it's the actual bushel amount, but you can see the actual cash that they received from the payment.
Yeah.
If their crop underperformed because of disaster.
So as representing the ag community, in your personal experience, do you care if somebody knows what your yield is on dry cropland? To make any difference
No,
to
not
you?
really. The things that I can see is when you're in the coffee shop, it's more than what you produced, and when you're reporting to an agency, it's less than what you produced. and that's.
By the way, I grew up with my uncle owning that coffee shop, and 7 o'clock was
So we should collect
like
this
closing time at the
information over
bar.
coffee,
Exactly.
not through the official report.
And that is, in a nutshell, is why I know why this was decided that this would be a better way for us to gather our information. So
Because my comments were kind of playing devil's advocate, let me back up and say, I really think this is a great idea and we should move in this direction. I just want us to think through all the negatives so that we aren't blindsided by our lessees saying, you didn't even think of this.
I agree.
Harvard, are you comfortable voting on it now, or do you want you want to table this to the next?
I'm okay.
So would you like me to proceed?
Please.
So the proposed language, which we've gone over fairly well, is again in 3C. It would change it to the rental formula will include individual production records as evidenced by annual crop insurance reports submitted to the State Land Board and current commodity prices, which is again is part of the formula I mentioned. And then C, again, if they cannot provide that information, C would fall into place at that time. And we'd go back to the annual crop information county-wide. Based upon the information provided to you, staff recommends the adoption of the proposed revisions to the cropland policy.
I guess I might just ask if we consult other state land board agencies, see what their policy is.
Not that I'm aware of.
I guess I do have, maybe I do have a slight I mean, if we implement this, I understand we can't, if we went and asked lessees how they felt, we'd probably know the answer. But are we going to run into what I don't know if we're going to cause a
I don't think we will. It's just simply at this point we are asking, we're not requiring, so they have an out. We're asking them to send it in, but they know if they do, in most cases, it's going to increase their payments. So being good conservative agriculturists, they don't do it.
See if we can consult and see what if other agencies, that just strengthens our position that we're not doing anything. Well,
I'm happy to.
Sorry. I think it's a good idea. I'm just thinking about this. I'd offer that we set the pricing policy. You all endorsed, the board endorsed the pricing policy and you have a chance to review the pricing policy every 3 years or so. So, I mean, the policy's been set. It's a matter of we don't think we're able to implement the policy as it was intended, which was based on
I got it.
Actual yield. So we're not really changing the policy we set. We're giving ourselves a tool to actually implement the policy you approved more effectively.
I'm just responding to the concerns that this is viewed as private information that lessees, so I don't have any context to know if we're being hypersensitive or otherwise. So
I would like to just add something that might give a little perspective. Is when I'm in a partnership with Bill on a farm, a crop share, which the state land board and the lessee is involved in. We're partners together, so I'm open to share that information because I wouldn't have this cropland if he wasn't allowing me to farm it. You know what I mean? So I think it's okay. I mean, we're not asking for anything that's not private because you're obviously leasing from. You know what I mean? That information is not gonna hurt the producer by giving that.
If we were in an individual crop share or in a private crop share situation, we would definitely be requiring this information.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Good. Okay. Any members of the public wish to comment on this item? Seeing none.
Chairman, I move that we modify cropland policy number 300-006 to require that lessees provide either an annual crop insurance report or submit written certification stating that they do not carry crop insurance pursuant to the specific language in the staff memorandum and delegate authority to the director to take appropriate action consistent with this decision.
It's been moved by Commissioner Moffitt. Second by Commissioner Bynum. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, William.
Thank you.
Next item, final action item 2F, policy review 300-005 rec leasing. Mr. Medina.
Morning, Commissioners.
Tab 15.
Good morning, Commissioners. A. Medina, Recreation Leasing Manager. The purpose of this discussion this morning is to review the recreation leasing policy and for staff to provide some recommended changes to the overall policy. In the board packet, there is more detail provided about the recreation leasing policy. There's a cover sheet as well as red lines to the existing policy, or the existing policy, red lines to the policy, and then the proposed changes in a final draft version. So I'll run through these through three primary changes to the recreation leasing policy that staff is recommending. The first recommended change is to remove the requirement that recreation leases be coterminous with the agricultural lessee. The current language or the current policy has this requirement. For background, our agricultural leases typically run 10-year terms, while our recreation leases run 5-year terms. The reason for having them coterminous was more an efficiency in inspections at the end of, because the district manager or staff could review the property on a recreation lease at the same time that an agricultural lease was being reviewed. The property is being reviewed for the agricultural lease either at the end of the 10-year term or at the mid-year or midterm inspection. The issue with this requirement is that recreation leases can be for a variety of different uses, and generally, depending on and the time frame at which the agricultural lease or any other surface lease for that matter on the property is inspected sometimes may be disruptive to the general purpose of having the recreational lease. As an example, a lot of our recreational leases are for hunting. A lot of them are for outfitted hunting. And as a result, if we're tying them to an agricultural lease that expires anywhere between the end of August through December, we're asking folks to renew their lease right in the middle of their outfitted hunting season, which causes a bit of disruption to their operation. So as a result, staff is recommending that that requirement be removed, primarily to better accommodate the operational season of the rec lessee, particularly hunting leases, although it can be any type of lease. So are there any questions on that change before I move on? The second recommended change is fairly minor. It's clarifying the minimum pricing in the policy to indicate that these minimums are per year. We do get, or I do receive a number of questions from folks asking if the 2-year, the $500 is for the entire 5-year term. We're clarifying this and saying that these are per year minimums, so that is clear. So it's just improving clarity in this policy.
Hey, I'm just moving back to the coterminous issue and why, sort of the rationale why it might not make sense. So, I mean, does staff have the ability to develop a lease so that if it is for hunting, if the idea is for hunting purposes, that if 5 years from today is November, and do you have the ability to extend that to project and have it terminate after a hunting season or before a hunting season? I mean,
we currently, as written, we're putting them with the agricultural lease.
Yeah.
We can, yes, we can.
Removing this, though, you could.
Yes, we could stagger them out to better accommodate the specific use.
Okay. Good.
And I did want to mention also, I mean, one of the reasons we had this coterminous was inspections with facilitating inspections on these properties with the addition of staff, primarily with an additional technical, I forget the name exactly, but we have additional staff at the district office that, aside from the district manager, and I do resource specialist, thank you, and I do inspections myself as well. So we have more staff to do these tasks. So I think that is less of an issue.
I think to Gary's point, though, rather than just say that these will be 5 years, they'll be 5 years rounded up to coincide with the hunting season.
Right. You can do a 5-year, 2-month lease.
We
Not sure we can. I'd have to look at the policy.
But you could do a 4-year, 10-month.
We can, but I think it says staff authority is delegated to staff for a 5-year lease. If it wants to be longer, it would come to you. I think most of the people who are from a practical standpoint, the folks who are applying for a lease for hunting season understand all this, and they apply
at the right time.
At the right time.
So that it expires at the right time.
Especially if it's an outfitter. If it becomes available and we advertise it and it goes up for a competitive bid, they don't know if they're going to get it. So they have no ability to plan for their business. So I think we could go shorter. So we could say, hey, this one's only going to be 4 years, 12 months, if that came up. Or we could go, well, just by policy.
Often known as 5 years. 4 years, 12 months.
Oh, sorry, 4 years.
Aha. Let's see how the state land board works.
But are you saying we'd be willing to negotiate a lease with an outfitter that said, I don't want a lease that expires in the middle? That doesn't do me any good. So can I have a 4-year, 9-month lease?
Yes. I mean, that's the flexibility we have as the policies are written.
Okay.
Or to go longer and just tell them it needs to come to the board for approval.
Yeah, and I would look to us to help a potential lessee see that because they may not.
Could we not just change the policy to say
Yeah, I mean,
for 5 years plus whatever to finish out a season?
We can. We've been pretty I don't know that we need to. For what it's worth, I think you've given us direction, and I think we can work within the limits of what's written.
I was just going to suggest perhaps 5 season, that the policy be written to reflect 5 seasons. Adjust that to meet your season, but
Although maybe we're opening a can of
Yeah.
worms because there's a crop season and there's a ranching season
say
and
not
we
all
don't
our
do
rec
anything
hazers
else
are
that way.
And not all are hunting.
Some are bikers. And
Right. I think. See, when you want to go over policy, we want to just start opening up all these issues.
No, it's good. It's good discussion.
And just to add an element, because I actually have my business operates in a similar way with seasons. It's as you go through the renewal process, I would suggest that you commence the contracts out of season and run them for 5 years. That's the easy solve. There may be some lapses, but it's not going to be material because there's not going to be any revenue loss during those periods.
I flipped it open. So the policy does say that staff is authorized to do leases for a term of 5 years or less. And Commissioner Shaw, to your question, we could change that. The board to this point has been tried to be consistent that 5 years is the threshold for in many cases, not for staff versus board decisions. So we'd might start to create some confusion about what the standard is, if you will.
I'm fine with where you are.
Yeah. Okay.
Could I just add one more?
Right.
For thought, Alicia Hawthorne with the Transactions and Record Services team. Also in the recreation leasing policy, all new leases in recreation come before the board anyway. So it's just the renewals that staff has the opportunity to approve. So it really depends. What's happening depends on what report it goes on to. So you're going to see it anyway, and we can help accommodate the workflow to make sure those leases out to the lessees. That helps.
So moving on to the third recommendation, staff is recommending that we remove the ability to assign a recreation lease from policy. As it currently reads, assignments on recreation leases may be approved by staff. Most of these, the reality is most of these recreation leases, as previously mentioned, are 5 years or less. They're fairly short term, and staff believes it's advantageous to, instead of assigning these or allowing a lessee to assign them, and I apologize, I'll back up a little bit. So these would happen in relation to an assignment happening when a lessee of ours owns, let's say, adjacent property, private property, to a recreation lease. They sell their private property. The new owner wants another, typically, or as we have seen in real estate listings, it'll say it comes with a recreation lease for the new owner. We're saying this would help clarify that is not an option. The new lessee or the new owner of the new property would have to come to the board and request a new recreation lease in order for a 5-year term or whatever that may be from the board. It facilitates our ability to be able to update update the lease, make sure we're comfortable with the lessee, and also our ability to obtain competitive bids or market rates at that time. So for those reasons, staff is recommending that we remove assignments as an option.
This is on me. I just realized this as I read our recommendation. I agree. I endorse the recommendation. I don't think we've written it correctly. I think we need to add a sentence to the policies that says recreation leases may not be assigned. This language just specifies that staff can't approve an assignment and doesn't really convey our intent that they can't be assigned. So I think if you agree with the concept, we may have to adjust the language.
So just add that as like 2 or a 3 under lease management? I'd just as soon go ahead and
Okay,
get
get
this
it.
than bring
Yeah.
it back.
Um,
So, lease management,
yeah.
sub 1, state land board staff may approve renewals, amendments, and extensions to whatever you just said. Right. Yeah, leases may not be assigned.
Yes, I think we would take, yes.
Remind me how that works with all of our current rec leases when we change something like this. The current leases that exist already can be
Grandfathered.
assigned, or how do we start implementing this with existing leases?
I am fairly certain that our existing recreation leases are require that, or as the board adjusts their policy over time, those apply to existing leases as well. I'd have to look at the lease language.
Could do it. I think my answer would be we can do it whichever way you'd like. We could either figure out how, but we could apply it to new leases going forward. So there's no change to current leases and contracts, which would probably be my preference. Or I could look at council and ask if we can, in fact, make a change to a contractual arrangement. And I'm not sure.
Most of your leases, although I'm not sure that all of them, reference the policies and incorporate the policies in the lease, so that changes to policy change lease terms, although that is, that's typically applied to fairly non-substantive changes.
If we made this change in policy, my suggestion would be that we put this language in the lease, and then new lease forms say that you can assign them, and in 5 years we'd be there.
Right. It just seems like if I'm currently a rec lease holder, and I really think that one of the great advantages is that by holding that lease, my adjacent land is worth more because I can advertise it. I'd want to know about this change. I'd want to know if it applies to me, and I, as a commissioner, would hope that the state land board would be kind of proactive in reaching out to folks and communicate this in a way that they aren't surprised when they think they can assign it, and that they think that by virtue of assigning it, they have more value in some adjacent land they own.
For all the assignments, our provisions require approval and are discretionary at the board. I mean, how the board implements internally, how it's handle the exercise of that discretion is one thing, but our relationship with the lessees is generally defined by a provision that says leases require approval by the board, and without approval are without effect. So,
I think your point was just communicate this. This is going to be important to people.
It's going to be really important to somebody.
Yep.
Just for reference, we've done one recreation lease assignment in the last 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't come up often, but it is in addressing it. I think it becomes more of an issue in addressing it when we see listings in there implying that it's going to be real estate listings. Is implying that it's going to be without any deliberation on the.
Well, we've seen that happen with ag leases, and so this is just being consistent across the board. So, okay.
Just to circle back, so the recommended language is in lease management that the rec leases going forward, rec leases may not be assigned.
I think that would accomplish the objective we're trying to.
Does that overly constrain us as well? Does that mean we can't assign? They can't be assigned in any circumstances? I understand it's policy.
So I thought you had settled on the staff doesn't have the authority to approve assignments, but that they can still be brought to the board.
I thought
No,
No, we were,
was recommending
we were
no assignment.
separated, but I mean, the board,
what I was saying is the language that's suggested up there doesn't really say leases can't be assigned. It just says staff can't do it. I think Abe's, if the
Sorry, I
board's willing to
misunderstood.
accept it, recommendation is that rec leases cannot be assigned.
And hence
period.
going forward, the lease is going to have a, article in it that says non-assignable. Okay. And looking as to existing leases.
I would let them run.
Okay.
I would recommend that you.
And we're comfortable having a complete non-assignment provision in the lease going forward. Okay.
okay.
So with those three items, staff recommends that based on the information provided at this board meeting and then the cover sheet, staff recommends adoption of the proposed revisions to the recreation leasing policy.
Okay, thanks. Are there members of the public who wish to make comment? Any further comments amongst Director Ryan?
Sir, did you align all three changes you wanted? We talked about clarifying that the rate was for a year. We talked about there can't be assigned. What was the third?
It was, I'm sorry, the first one.
Insurance.
No, it was coterminous with the.
Okay, there it was. Okay.
Seeing no further comment or discussion, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the revisions to Recreation Leasing Policy 300-05 with the added provision that leases may not be assigned and new leases will be modified with language stating such going forward, and delegate authority to the director to take action consistent with this decision, and the changes are as presented in the board packet.
Okay, been moved by Commissioner Moffett.
Second
by Commissioner Shaw. Further discussion. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Thanks, Abe.
And I'll just add that, and I heard clearly that we will figure out how to communicate this change to existing lessees and new lessees going forward.
But the existing lessees don't have a non-assignment clause, so.
It's still, they may consider renewal. We may want to inform them before renewal comes
absolutely.
up or something. So we'll figure out what a communication strategy is.
Okay, next item under final action, 2G Policy Review 300-003 Renewable Energy. Ms. Bolin, tab 16.
Good morning, Commissioners. Paige Bolin, Renewable Energy Program Manager. Today, we are going to be reviewing the Renewable Energy Leasing Policy, which was adopted by the board in 2014. As some background, the renewable energy line of business was, for all intents and purposes, created in 2013. Up until that point, we've been fairly reactive, done only wind leases, and weren't really reaching out to the community to try and find opportunities on state trust lands. So there was a lot that we didn't know when we created the line of business and the policy that was in effect. The result today, 3 years later, is we know a lot more. And as a result, there's a lot more blood on the policy document that you have in front of you today. So what we have for you to review is the original policy, a redlined version of that policy, and because it is so messy, we put a draft policy together that we'd like the board's consideration for adoption today. The good news is what it really boils down to is some minor formatting for clarity and consistency, and 2 substantial changes. The first change is that staff would like to remove minimum production lease rates and minimum project sizes from the policy. Production lease rates are determined by the board. Every new production lease must come before the board for consideration, discussion, and approval. What we know today that we didn't know 3 years ago is that pricing for production leases varies greatly depending upon the deal that the producer or the developer of the renewable energy program has struck with the energy provider they're going to be selling their power to. That can vary by award because they are done by competitive bid, and it can vary by place in the state because, as everybody knows, land values vary greatly from Denver Metro to the Eastern Plains and the Western Slope. So we had thought initially that these minimum rates would be fairly easy to apply, and what we found is that's not really true. So we believe that those should be negotiated on a case-by-case basis and bring them to the board for discussion each and every time a production lease comes up. The same applies to project size, which was also in the original policy. The original project size for a solar garden was 20 acres. Advances in technology are happening so quickly that viable solar arrays can be built on 3 acres. And we have a lot of little tiny parcels that we'd like to be able to take advantage of. So we'd like to take that out of the policy as well and kind of work with these on a basis.
Narrow strip of land in Moffett County, but
I have one just like that in Denver County I'm working on right now.
1 acre long, yeah.
Not quite 1 acre.
Right.
You would be amazed at what they're doing with small pieces of ground today. The second change is to include minimum rates for planning leases and what we call one-time charges. One-time charges include bonus payments, uses for roads, uses for burying utility lines, doing interconnections. All of those are done one time at the beginning of the lease based on what they build. Those rates should be consistent. They should be very transparent, and the project developers should be able to see those and factor those into their programming when they do their pro forma models. The other reason to do this would be because planning leases are approved at a staff level. So the board doesn't see a planning lease, but you do see the production leases. Planning leases are short-term, 2 to 3 years, depending upon whether it's a utility scale or a very small solar garden. About half of those actually go on to become production leases. So it's been a very efficient process to have those approved at a staff level, and having a minimum rate in the policy because they don't come to the board helps with consistency in applying our policies.
Are those other one-time charges enumerated, or?
Some of them have been enumerated. Most of them have been enumerated in the policy that you have before you.
Where would I see those?
Those would be in Section 3, lease terms.
Mm-hmm.
Under B, or under C, excuse me, which is minimum pricing. So minimum bonus payments, minimum assignment rates, and some of the other ones we are asking for some flexibility to be able to adjust those based on what's being used out in the field. So typically it's roads, underground utilities, and assignments and bonus payments.
So things like roads, utilities, where's?
Those are
how would
not
I-
enumerated in here. Those, we didn't change those. The standard lease rate or the assignment rate is something that we need to put in there because they were varying greatly. There was no change to what we've always done for the road rate, so I didn't put those in there. Right now, we currently charge, and it's enumerated in our leases, is $4,600 per linear mile for new roads and $2,600 per linear mile for existing roads.
So is that all? Does
That's not
the
going to change.
lessee have access to all of that information?
Yes, that is.
But I don't want our other charges. And
yes, that's all. That is, they do have access to all of that information.
Where?
That is in the draft lease that we provide to them before they enter into a production lease. When they get an application form for a production lease, they get a draft copy of our lease format so they understand exactly how we structure our deals. I can include it in here if you believe that that would be more appropriate.
no, I mean just one-time charges, and then that's like my cell phone bill, and it's all hidden things. So I'd prefer us not to surprise people. Or
I'm
have any
more than
sort of
happy
that.
to
But
add
this is
those
our
in here.
I mean, this is our policy. I just want to make sure that that's not how we communicate.
You have a very
Everyone
good
knows
point.
up front what hook for.
Right.
You have a very good point, and item 5 would be road charges, and item 6 would be utility charges.
Well, they don't have to be in the policy.
Yeah.
We're just asking it that they are at some point communicated. And you mentioned it would be before the production lease, but what about at the planning?
Those charges do not apply to a planning lease.
Right, but as they're planning, won't they want to know about those down the road?
They do get a
Yeah.
copy of
I think
that.
what you said is you give them a copy of a production lease when they sign up for a planning lease. so they
Correct.
know what's
Thank
going
you.
to be expected.
I'm sorry, I was not clear about that. They do get a copy of a production lease template at that time.
We were going, I think, if we were going to be consistent with some of our other lines of business, like rights of way or towers, when we have a standard pricing, we put it on the website. And I think that's an option. We wouldn't have to give them a lease. They could just look on the website and say, standard charges for these kinds of things are, and that might address your point.
That would help people that are prospectively looking at this also to begin to take a look at numbers without having to have a meeting and sit down.
Yes.
Thank you.
I apologize for not being clear. That constitutes the significant changes that are included in all of the red lines that you see before you.
Okay, Director Ryan.
Question, and I'm sorry to spring this on you while you're up there. I owe it to you to ask these things earlier. The problem we've been having with the one would-be lessee at Lowry is that our planning lease allowed the guy who got there first to sort of tie up the whole 640 acres for 2 years. And this guy's saying, hey, I know he only wants 20 and I want 20. Make him pick his 20 now so I can pick my 20. And we've been caught. How should we make any changes here that will help address that? Should we narrow a planning lease down to a smaller area, or give them a certain window in which they've got to hone in on a subset of the 640, or how do we deal with that problem?
The situation that you describe indeed has now been worked out.
Good.
I'm happy to say that has, in the 25 to 30 planning leases we've done, that is the one instance that this occurred. What we typically say is that existing lessees or subsequent lessees are getting their lease subject to existing leases. That was a very tough situation, and I'm not sure if it's easily fixable in the policy. Trying to maintain some flexibility and having them work together, and having us be able to, based on county input. So a lessee, as an example, comes to us for a planning lease. We give them a planning lease on, say, a 160 acre section. They need to go to the county to get their final site plan. The county may have some requirements that say, I need you to move it east, I need you to move it south, I need you to move it west. They may have some siting requirements that require that they move it somewhere that's slightly, further outside of where they need to be. Do we want to kick them out of line simply because the county had some siting requirements? It was a difficult.
As a practice, do we draw the line as small as we can?
As a practice, we do try and draw the line as small as we can, knowing what we know about who's in front of them. In this particular case, they had to jump over a drainage channel, and then there's other issues that resolved. I'm trying to be sensitive
thing,
to
maybe
that.
it's a communication thing, or maybe this was a one-time thing that won't happen again.
I'd like to be able to monitor that, and perhaps if it becomes an issue again, bring another policy modification forward that would address it. Communication is key in things like that, and we've worked really hard to be open with both parties and have them work together.
Okay.
So based on the information that I've provided to you today and any questions that you may have, we are recommending adoption of the draft version in your packet for the renewable energy leasing policy.
I don't want to beat it to death, but I would offer the commissioners the option of adding language to the policy that says we will we will encumber the smallest possible planning area when considering planning leases, if you want to do something with that.
I'm almost assuming that's as read. I mean, that's a given.
Okay. Any members of the public wish to make comment? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Hey, just to be clear, no changes to the changes as proposed. All right. Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the revisions to the renewable energy leasing policy 300-003 as presented in the staff memorandum and delegate authority to the director to take appropriate action consistent with this decision.
It's been moved by Commissioner Moffett.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Shaw. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes in favor. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you very much.
To make a quick comment about this process is working. I mean, this is one of the first times I've seen actual policies reviewed in a very thoughtful, timely way, and I think it's working as it should. We reviewed it and we're adjusting based on information and experience. So commend you, Director Ryan, and staff for making these
Thank you.
a priority.
Morning, Commissioners. Greg Okish, Assistant Director. Commissioner Butterworth, I'm pleased that you said that. I was going to say that I forgot how much fun policy work. This last one, and Alicia touched on this earlier in her comments, this was not a policy that was scheduled for its 3-year review. That's 2 years and 12 months. But it was one that, based on some recent discussions in front of the board, some recent situations that staff has been dealing with, we thought might be appropriate for some adjustment. And so we'll present those recommendations for your consideration. Essentially, this is about documenting in policy what actions staff will take when a lease is secured through competitive bid. So first of all, this is only dealing with leases that were obtained through competitive bid. And then the lease is either terminated or surrendered during the term, 10-year term of the lease. This is primarily about ag leases. And the situation that's come up is that we've had a lease obtained by competitive bid. And this is described in a little more detail in your memo. And then the successful lessee who obtained that lease comes to staff in some period of time within the term of the lease and asks for a rent reduction. Now, in some of those have come to you. Staff has generally said no to those requests. Some of them have come to you as requests for review of staff decision. The board to this point has been pretty consistent in saying no, you would not reduce the rent. So the lessee then has the option of surrendering the lease. They can, under the terms of the lease, turn it in. What would then happen is we would advertise that vacant lease for bids, and the potential concern is that the other parties who are interested 2 years, 3 years ago are no longer present for some reason, and the lessee who turned it in potentially regains that lease at a lower rate. So it really defeats the purpose and spirit of the competitive bid process. Currently, what staff has been doing, but this is not in policy, is staff has been informing a lessee that if they chose to surrender that lease, they would not be allowed to bid. And that, I might be careful with my language. There's nothing that precludes them from bidding, but that staff would not recommend the acceptance of that bid to the board. We would view their previous behavior as indicative of potential future behavior and not recommend them as a successful bidder. Our goal is to clarify the steps that staff should take with the objective of making sure that the trust receives the financial benefit of leasing state trust land at market rates, that we maintain the integrity of the competitive bid process so that people are paid, are encouraged to participate and feel like they're treated fairly when they do, and to clarify what is currently practice on the part of staff. So we've made some proposed language, suggested some proposed language. It's in your package. It's essentially to items 2, 3, and 4 under paragraph B in the existing policy. And essentially, item 3 would say that we would deny any bid received in a subsequent competitive bid process for a lease terminated or surrendered. Terminated would be could be for non-payment, for example. This would be, so a lessee could choose to simply stop making payments on their lease. We would go through some steps. It would be terminated. We would then advertise it with the same outcomes I just described. So we're saying terminated or surrendered during the term of the lease, either by the terminated surrendered lessee, by any immediate family member of that terminated surrendered lessee, or by any legal entity created by that terminated surrendered lessee. They would be allowed to bid in the future, but only once that lease has been awarded to another party for some period of time. And then lastly, to deny an assignment or sublease of that parcel of state trust land to a party who had been terminated or surrendered the lease, so that they can't have somebody else lease it,
Straw man it,
and then get it back in their control. So those are essentially the recommendations that are in your package to deal with the issue that I described. So,
Director Ryan.
B3 says deny any bid received in a subsequent competitive bid process. Is the act of putting it out as a vacant parcel a competitive bid process? Like, suppose the guy's the only bidder. Is that a competitive bid process?
I'm going to ask.
I just want to make sure we're not in right language that undoes what you're trying to do.
Well, actually, and I was going to ask Ed for input, but we worked with Ginny on this, and I can defer to her as well. But we thought it dealt with the situation we were trying to. But your points, Ginny, do you have you want to come up?
No.
Good afternoon again, Jenny Shabarazi, Assistant Attorney General. We were looking specifically at the problem where it would be coming up for competitive bid. That is a good question, and I hadn't really thought about that.
I was thinking, although it may not be correct, that by putting it back out for bid, that was a competitive bid process, and that's the crux of your question, right?
Yes. If he's the only bidder, he says, I won, that wasn't competitive anymore.
Well, and
So go ahead. Sorry.
well, I think I understand your question about whether competitive bid process is the right term, but it does say we can deny any bid received in a subsequent competitive bid process. So if we put it out for bid, which we would expect to do, and you're saying we only received one bid and it was from
And it's from the guy who handed it back.
I think this covers.
Okay. Just, I don't have an opinion. I just want to make sure we thought through the wording.
Mm-hmm.
Unrelated, but related to the broader lease. We do make adjustments in lease terms for things like drought. And I assume that's written into the lease and this would not impact that. Is that, at least my understanding is, I wasn't here for it, but
Okay.
we adjusted payments. We had drought rebates or something like that for
We
years.
did drought. We did adjust carrying capacity on leases and therefore reduce the rent during periods of drought. I don't think this is related to that.
Okay.
Or are you seeing a way that it,
I just want to make sure because what this I understand what we're trying to do, which is limit it to situations where circumstances have not changed materially since the lease was signed, and the winning bidder or lessee had just decided he's overpaid. Which leads to my next question. Does the lease, and I haven't looked at the lease in a while, so I apologize. Does it contemplate adjustment if there's a material change in circumstances relating to the lease premises? Not just drought, but let's say you had a flash flood.
Well, fire, we adjust.
Fire or creek bed moving.
Our
or
district
expanding
manager,
and
if something like that happened, or if we were to lease a piece when we do a solar garden, since we were just talking about renewables, we remove that acreage from the lease. So the lease allows and does contemplate changes.
Okay.
Our district manager would, review the situation and make a determination if the carrying capacity should be adjusted and for what period of time.
And I don't want to overly hem us in here, but we're pretty comfortable that we've got the discretion to do this when there is a material significant change to circumstances. What this applies to is not that.
Correct.
Okay.
If I may, again, Jenny Shabrazi, this is just granting that authority to the director in his discretion. It doesn't mandate. It could, if there were compelling reasons presented, I think that the director could consider those.
Right.
Okay.
Of judgment.
Any other questions?
Are there members of the public who wish to comment on this item? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve approve revisions to the lease actions policy 200-004 as presented in the staff memorandum, and delegate authority to the director to take appropriate action consistent with this decision.
Moved by Commissioner Moffett, second
Second.
by Commissioner Carney. Well done, he's on the board.
Had to get
All right.
By the way, feel free to chime in anytime.
I just had to get in the minutes.
Yeah, there you go.
Default
Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Chair votes in favor, motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Thanks, Greg. Our next item, final action 2I, board leasing agenda for July 2017, tab 18. Ms. Hawthorne.
Thank you, commissioners. Bear with me one moment. For the record, Alicia Hawthorne with the Transactions and Record Services team. So this is the July board leasing agenda. We have 12 items, and 5 of which are competitive bids. 3 are agriculture leases, 2 are recreation leases, and then we have 7 new leases, 2 of which are commercial leases. 1 is a road access permit, and there are 4 recreations as well. In a conversation with the program manager, Paige Bolin, we do have an acreage clarification on items 6 and 7. And Ms. Bolin, I can't read her writing. I'm going to need some help. And if I could, before you add in, Paige, one of the kind of for clarity after our last conversation. So when we report on the board leasing agenda on competitive bids, and you'll see at least one comment in this particular report, we may have put it out for competitive bid and somebody drops out. So really it goes back to there's really only one bid that came in or that we could sign a lease on. And so we still consider that a competitive bid because we at least everyone had an opportunity to bid. So I don't know if that helps in that conversation. So back to those 2 items, number 6 and 7, we want to make sure for the record we have the correct acreage in those items.
Paige Bolin with the real estate section. Items 6 and 7 are part of an ongoing effort by the real estate section to renew ground leases at our Dow Junction property in Vail. The 2 leases in question are with existing lessees. Their leases expired in May. As part of a renewal of their leases, they came to you today as new leases because they will be on our new lease form, and we have adjusted the acreage of each area a little bit to accommodate the needs of each of the tenants. So one of our lessees, Daryl Bangert, runs an outdoor rafting operation.
Sage, isn't it?
Sage Outdoors
Okay.
Outfitters. He's going to be increasing his area a little bit to, all told, there's about 0.8 acres between these two tenants. They share a common property line. We're going to be splitting that area more evenly. So about 0.4 acres and 0.4 acres each, to give Sage Outdoor a little bit more parking area for their vans and to contain Mr. Dillon a little bit more in his operation.
Well, that, and my question there, because those of us who went on the tour last year remember that, I'm not sure it was this lease, but some of the lease premises there were pretty in a somewhat disrepaired state. I'm going to try to be.
That would be Mr. Dillon's lease area.
Okay.
And in an effort to make sure that we have boundaries,
Okay.
we're going to be constraining his lease area a little bit and containing him within a fenced area around the buildings.
Was that the mechanical operation? What's he doing on that site?
He is a general contractor by trade.
Okay.
And the building is used as a mechanic shop for his company vehicles, he informs us. But he also, because he's a general contractor, has a lot of building materials that he has historically stored around the property rather than within his lease area. So we've created some stricter boundaries for him to keep the property in nicer shape since it is right there on I-70.
And you also have a 5-year lease versus a 10-year lease with the other one.
For the same reasons. Mr. Bangert has been a very good lessee. He takes good care of the property. He keeps it visually attractive. He's been with us for a number of years. We felt that based on the board's feedback in March that a 10-year lease was appropriate in an effort to make sure that Mr. Dillon remains a good tenant and that he continues to follow our advice in keeping the property cleaned up. In 5 years, we can review that and maybe we go to a longer lease or maybe not.
Eagle County right now, a general contractor finds him or herself on the horns of a dilemma between taking care of their property and just drinking from a fire hose all the work that they can eat. So, Paige, did we already renew the mini storage? I think.
Yes, that was last month's leasing agenda.
This completes the wedge, right? That piece between 6 and 70.
Correct, on the south side of I-7, on the south side of 6th Avenue, in between 6 and 70. You are correct. I believe next month we'll be having a discussion about the ground lease on next to the CDOT.
While we were away, Joe Klosterman, the housing director, has received 2 promotions and is now the CFO of the county. So we know a guy. Time comes.
So are there any questions on those 2 ground leases? Thank you.
Any members of the public wish to speak on this item? Any further questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, after consideration of the materials presented and testimony given at our regular meeting of July 13th, 2017, I move that it is in the best interest of the trust to approve the July 2017 board leasing agenda as presented and delegate authority to take appropriate action consistent with this decision. How'd I do, Alicia?
Excellent.
Been moved by Commissioner Moffitt.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Bynum. Further discussion. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Your votes in favor, motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Second to last item, minutes. As you recall, our June board meeting was a teleconference, and I would ask if there were any amendments or additions. If there aren't any, I'll just accept them by acclamation. Good. Looking forward, our next meeting is August 9th and 10th up in Jackson and Routt counties. Are commissioners comfortable with the logistics for that? Do we want to review that in any fashion? I think we've talked to Barbara a little bit about some of the logistics, but I think we've got those ironed out.
Please do tell.
I believe correct me if I'm wrong, Abe or Barbara, but we'll be in Walden on Wednesday, and we'll go out tour, and we will come back to Walden and then venture to Steamboat.
Circus, we'll move to Steamboat.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I'm not sure I describe it. You're going from here through Walden, you're stopping for lunch,
Mhm.
and you're continuing on to Steamboat. So you're not going out and coming back to Walden at any point.
See, that's my question.
That's her question.
Because I'm going to Walden Tuesday night.
Right.
So if my car is in Walden, are we caravanning around and ending in Steamboat? In which case I still have a car back in Walden, or am I caravanning by myself? That's
We'd
my
have to
question.
figure out how to do something with your car. We'll be Denver, stopping in the state forest. So we'll have to get you to the state forest, which is 30 miles this direction from Walden, back to Walden for lunch with the commissioners and some briefing, then north to the ranch and up to the sand dunes, and then
Over to
northwest to
Steamboat.
Steamboat. So it's a
Okay.
linear.
You're aware of the issue
Yeah.
you've raised, and we will
And I'm
solve
really
it.
flexible other than coming and meeting you all in Denver Wednesday morning. I can meet
Yeah.
you along a highway Wednesday morning.
And if need be, we can at least get from Vale up together.
Okay.
Or I
But
could
there's
try-
still the same problem whether it's one or two of you.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll make sure we resolve it.
Yeah. Okay.
And then looking really far ahead, I have on my calendar that we changed the October dates. Is that right?
September
that.
dates.
I think we might have looked at changing.
Moved October because I had a conference that fell right over our regular meeting. So I think we moved it back a week.
I have it back a week and I just didn't.
Yep, that was
I wanted to make sure I had the correct dates.
I'm sorry.
courtesy. Thank you all.
So it's 4th
Well,
and 5th?
September, just to be clear, we did move that to
We also
Tuesday,
moved that.
Wednesday.
That is
Uh,
correct.
The
To
12th and
accommodate-
13th. Yes.
Fun.
So September 12, Tuesday, September 12, and Wednesday, September 13th.
Oh, good.
And I will not be here.
Okay.
That's nota bene. I did not have that one.
And then October, you're correct. I think we did move it up to Wednesday, October 4th and Thursday, October 5th
Here.
is what we're holding
Yes,
in Denver.
that is what my calendar says
Yes.
also. And I think that was because we were going to be a week later and that was going to conflict with the fellowship program.
Mhm.
Got it.
All right.
If you would like, I can have Barb send you invites for those dates again that you can accept again. Or would that be helpful? No.
I'm going to manually enter it into
Yeah,
my CRM.
Got it.
Okay. Are there any other items? All right. Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.